Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
Quite frankly, I get most of my news from you.
Joan Esposito.
Y'all ready for this?
On WCPT 820.
Well, welcome. I'm not Joan Esposito. I'm Hal Sparks. I'm filling in for Joan as she's away, and we've got a lot of news to cover. We've also got calls from everybody out there in Joan land. 773-763-9278 is our number on WCPT Radio. You can call in. You can give your points, your opinions, your ideas, any rags, any bones, any rags today. I'm Hal Sparks. I host a show on the weekends on WCPT, Hal Sparks radio program Mega Worldwide, and I also live stream, which I'm doing right now at infotainmentwars.com and at twitch.tv/Hal Sparks. Now, it's hard to begin in any news cycle like the one we're in, especially when it involves the Trumps, because currently Don Jr. is testifying in a court of law in New York City, this time for the defense of his father, which I have to say might be, I guess, getting Don Jr. to testify on Trump's behalf is, I suppose there are dumber things. I suppose, there could be, I guess, letting Eric do it. That comes to mind. That's obviously true. And then, of course, Ivanka famously has put basically I wouldn't say a pall over the entire proceedings, but it certainly painted her father into a corner as far as what she would be culpable with and what she could admit to, because she can only admit to seeing and doing so much to get him out of his troubles that wouldn't also incriminate her. So she was, walking that fine line between I don't really know much about the whole thing. I picked out sheets and whatnot. In the Trump family world, I guess that's the female equivalent of pouring concrete. I was there after all the deals were made. I was there after all the I's had been crossed and the T's had been dotted. And I don't really know much about it. I was just there to make sure the drapes and the carpet match. So I don't take much. I don't think anybody puts much weight in what the Trumps are saying on the stand in general in defense of their father, or even, quite frankly, if it's technically in defense of their father, because it's hard to know if this is any of this is actually helping. That said, there is, like I said, a lot of news going on, a lot that I would like to cover. Specifically, there's kind of a big deal going on in San Francisco right now. I don't know how many people. It's so funny that when there's so much odd percolating Trump news out there, that it tends to eat up genuine news, which, by the way, may or may not move the ball any direction, but is out there and certainly would be normal in the news cycle and something people would want to know. And that is namely that Biden and Xi Jinping are meeting at the APEC conference in San Francisco very soon. Much has been made about these two guys getting together. Will there be a call out? Will there be lines drawn and crossed and what have you? The reality is, welcome to stalemate. There really is no bargaining point that either one is going to make any headway on. China, in a curious sense, is admitting to, or at least allowing for the awareness of, that it needs the United States now more than the United States needs it, which is a total flip of the belief system we've all labored under. The China will eat our lunch, it's soon to be the greatest economy in the world, or even that it's even the second biggest economy in the world, when in reality, if you look at the numbers of what they're actually producing, what they're actually spending on their own people, and never mind the per capita aspect of an economy, that I happen to think, on a personal level, that the size of your economy is sort of the size of its schmear, if you will. That if there's somebody in the neighborhood that you have 5 cars and you have 4 family members, and then there's somebody next door that has 4 cars and everybody else in the neighborhood has 2 cars, but the person with 4 cars has 100 people living in their house, you could hardly say that they are better off than the people in the house that have 4 members and 5 cars, or the house that has four members in two cars, for that matter. The more that economy is spread out over people, over a vast populace, the the shallower it gets. And so this illusion to the breadth of the Chinese economy has been held up for a very long time, midway between wishful thinking and bets that just couldn't die. That people could invest in China for a very long time because it had nowhere to go but up, and the economy would respond with a return on that investment. That petered out about 8 years ago. And it became abundantly clear to anybody who was paying attention that the well was dry, and that if anything, the well was now borrowing water from elsewhere or full of toxic substances that don't even pass for water anymore. And from that point on, there's been sort of an awakening. There's been an awareness amongst maybe the investment class was first, maybe it's some world leaders, maybe it's what would be the administrative state, if not the leaders of the countries who can't maybe admit to what's going on in China, that economy is all but it's on life support. It's in very deep trouble. And so the Biden-Xi meeting that's coming up is really going to be more about old-fashioned militaristic stuff on the level of a country that is bigger than North Korea, but its goals in the world are starting to align with North Korea in some ways. It is a small and shrinking country on a very large landmass, and the fight over a sunken ship off the coast of the Philippines has more at play in it between the United States and China than any new economic bridges that will be built. Will China continue to make mid-level consumer goods for the foreseeable future in some areas? Sure. Is anybody moving in there to continue doing that? No. They're all going to the Philippines or Vietnam or anywhere else in the South China Sea, all the places that were aligned and being brought up effectively under the Obama administration, what was called TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which got a bad rap because of NAFTA and this anti-trade deal feeling in the United States had driven basically everybody to cast aspersions on any trade deals. They're just nervous about the entire thing. It was just another way for corporations to move their jobs offshore. The difference between, I would say, what initially was in NAFTA and minor still in the USMCA versus what the TPP was seeking to do was corporate America not moving jobs out of the United States and into China or other markets, but moving those jobs out of China into countries that don't use slave labor. The ever-growing consensus about manufacturing in China is that there is no way to distance oneself from a business standpoint from the Uyghur slave labor, and specifically in a way that I think most people would hopefully respond a little, especially with America's history, a little more with a little more outrage, as it were, a little more concern. For example, there was a story recently in The Guardian that BP and Spotify, amongst other countries, were buying carbon credits from a Chinese business to meet their green goals. And that this company that they were buying them from, these green carbon credits that they were touting and were very excited about, were essentially existed at a cost of about 35 cents a ton for carbon captured, and were sold at and I'll get the exact price because it's kind of it was a stunning number, somewhere in the order of $4 and sold for $4.35. So effectively, $4 profit on every one of these credits, which I guess is good money if you can get it. And if it's actually removing carbon from the air, maybe this is a premium worth purchasing by BP and Spotify and others. However, the company itself did this carbon recapture idea through the burning of cotton stalks as a way of locals producing fuel without, I guess, burning fossil fuels as such. So still releasing the carbon from these burned stalks into the air, and the stalks themselves are from plants that were harvested and the cotton removed from them by Uyghur slave labor. So BP and these other companies that had bought into this were, they're trying to do the right thing. They were trying to find there weren't that many places they could find to buy carbon credits, and there's a huge market for them. Hence the markup, hence the 35 cents to start, $4.35 for what you're actually paying. And the damage continues. Literally, this is from burning cotton stalks. I fail to see what specifically is carbon neutral about setting fire to anything. I suppose because it's burning local turbines, or it's the effect of a wood-burning stove, it's an absurdity. And on top of that, it is on the back of Uyghur slave labor. Now, people will often use the euphemism around these situations in China, specifically calling it forced labor. I've yet to find anybody who can tell me the difference that in any meaningful way between forced labor and slave labor. It feels like a distinction without a difference, meant to, I guess, and I don't know why they think it sounds any better. It certainly doesn't. But this is just one of the starting points of the conversations that are lurking in the background during this APEC summit. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back and talk about a couple more of those things. Then we're also going to talk about what I called earlier today on my morning show, Memogate, which is this story coming out about State Department officials writing a letter to the Biden administration accusing them of genocide for supporting Israel militarily and in the attempts, at least, at making these humanitarian pauses, which is very odd. I'll bring you up to date on what's going on in Ukraine. And then, of course, I have a bunch of side stories that I call, meanwhile, back on Earth, that I would like to bring up to you that are constantly growing and expanding. Life is going on behind this hum of the fear machine that you hear on all your social medias, and I want to remind you of it. We'll be back right after this. Chicago, are we out? Because I don't hear the music.
Yeah, you're on break now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I can't hear the music coming my way, just so you know. So I'm assuming.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
That's okay.
You should be able to now.
Excellent.
Did you see I'm putting caller info in the chat?
I did not, but I will look at that real quick.
Yeah, just I think what the private chat that you and I have, right?
Yes. Thank you. There we go. Okay. Bink. There you go. Jim in Chicago about Speaker Johnson. Excellent. Okay. Let me get through this next segment, and then I'll get to Jim.
Okay.
Yeah, it's funny, but the carbon credits on this on these corn stalks, or in the cotton stalks rather, would be more valuable if they just let them rot on the ground. Dead serious. Like, the fact that they're burning them is so absurd, as I don't understand why anybody hears that even once and thinks it's a good idea. It's very curious. By the way, hi chat room. Welcome. How are you?
We're back in 30.
Okay, thank you. Oh, it's a manic Monday. It's a panic Monday. Yeah, fertilizer, exactly. I mean, that's nature's fertilizer. It won't be enough though, because they've destroyed their it's just it's so bad. I don't even know if people grasp how bad it is. I'm not hearing music if we're coming back.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
So, welcome back. I'm Hal Sparks. I'm filling in for Joan today, and so much news to cover. But one of the things that I want to sort of put in people's consciousness about this upcoming Xi Jinping San Francisco meeting with Joe Biden, because they haven't had a real sit down. They've had a sideline sit down at one of the gatherings, but pretty much there's no love lost between these two. And I got to say, there might be a bit of a tap dance around a couple of issues, but there's nothing set to change. Xi Jinping and most of the leadership of the CCP have doubled down on their feelings about Taiwan, South China Seas, the Philippines, the what effectively are their new territorial map. So the only room they have to move around any of these things is if they admit the financial trouble that they are in, which they are not willing to do, because the minute they do, the exodus that has already been difficult and has caused, economic havoc in China over the last year especially, has continued to get worse. This is just from Bloomberg today. This is the title of it. China's economic recovery is losing momentum, data show. I guess it's supposed to be data shows, but alternative indicators show weakening consumer demand. China to release official October retail sales data this week. China's consumption rebound slowed. By the way, the rebound there. Let me talk a little bit about this, and U.S. economy versus where we were in COVID, where we are now, where they are, is that there is a mentality that growth is growth for growth's sake. And let me tell you, if you're 6 feet tall and you're standing in an 8-foot hole and you manage to climb out, you are not 14 feet tall. You are not 8 feet, you're not flying 8 feet above the ground. You have simply gotten out of the hole. If you have only partially gotten out of the hole, if you are 6 feet tall in an 8-foot hole and you manage to get your head above it, you are not 4 feet taller than you were previously before you fell into the hole. And this economic ideology that seems to just let that slide in all conversations is ubiquitous in all the economic data and stuff that we keep hearing everywhere. Inflation for inflation's sake, the cost of goods. I saw a fellow yesterday who will remain unnamed. He's a relatively famous dude who is not a Biden fan, let's just say, and is a big Trump fan. And he was reposting, there was a guy in Costco walking around showing how the cost of food hasn't gone up 5% or 7%. It's gone up 50%. And I dare you to tell me different. And his example was a $9.99 64-ounce jar of mayonnaise, which is a significant amount of mayonnaise, that used to cost $4.99. When he shows the picture, because he's at Costco, and this is where these are bulk prices, he shows the picture that from when he bought it before. It says $4.99. If you look at the actual thing that's up on the wall above it, it says $4.99 down from $9.99 if you have the two of the coupons next to it. That isn't even in the realm of the argument about inflation or not inflation or how much is good or economic data. That is simply the inability to read or understand the passage of time in any kind of reasonable sense. It used to cost $9.99. They had too much, so they ran a special. The special is over. It's back to the price. This happens in stores all the time. I can only imagine what this gentleman's experience on, post Black Friday is. He must assume that by the Thursday after Black Friday, we have experienced 120% inflation, and it never stops. There's a bunch of that. So in the conversation about China's quote-unquote rebound, it says it slowed, it's a rebound that never was. It's a rebound that didn't exist. And by the way, I'm going to get to callers right after the next break, 773-763-9278. I see we've already got a couple people on the line, which will be great. And I'm Hal Sparks. I'm filling in for Joan Esposito today. And, of course, live streaming at infotainmentwars.com and, of course, at twitch.tv/Hal Sparks. They're talking about Chinese consumer demand being a real problem in that they're experiencing currently deflation, which is basically a glut of goods that no one wants and can't use. Everyone is buying what are called consumables, i.e. food and toilet paper, and they are not buying any kind of long-term goods. And if they're buying some consumables, they are jarred and canned and long-lasting ones, which is the kind of stuff you do when you expect the rapture or a tornado. That's not a good economic sign. In the article, it goes on to say, an indicator of Chinese consumer demand for recreation and transportation published by Paris-based QuantCube Technology, along with an independent survey of consumer sentiment by U.S. company Morning Consult, both fell in October from the previous month. Now, when they say that, it's like, oh, okay, well, it's down from the month before. So the month before must have been fine. The month before was terrible. And the month before that was terrible. And the month before that was terrible. There was no effective rebound in any of these areas. If you go back to, like, let's say if in America, if we talked about it this way, we went back to holiday travel, right? You go back to holiday travel and you go, this is when everybody's flying right around Thanksgiving, Christmas. If you judged airline traffic in mid-March or, I guess in mid-September or something like that, based on the standards set by Christmas flights, the biggest flying days of the year, the day before Thanksgiving, the Sunday after Thanksgiving, what have you, everyone would look at you like you're a lunatic, because that's an artificial imbalance created. Well, it's an organic imbalance created by a specific demand in a specific time period. China has a very similar thing, which is they have what's called Singles Day for purchasing, is their version of Black Friday. And then in the January, February, they have their Chinese New Year, which is huge because everybody travels home for it. And so it's an enormous travel time. That in and of itself was muted this year by a lot, which is a terrible sign. That imagine a bad Black Friday followed by nobody traveling for Christmas. That all those, bring those down by 20%, and imagine the conversation that's happening in the U.S. markets about this, and you'll understand on an even bigger scale what's going on in China. Follow that up with those numbers are bad, and every cascading month afterwards is bad, to the point where they are experiencing deflation. Nobody wants to buy anything. Things are just rotting on the shelves because nobody has money to spend, and those that do have money are so worried about the future, they're just keeping it. And we'll get to how that expresses itself in the U.S. market. And, by the way, stay away from Temu, if you will, because that's one of the ways they've been trying to offload a lot of this stuff. And it's sort of like Wish items that have been dropped a couple of times. It's fairly terrible. But this is the position that Xi Jinping is coming to this meeting with Joe Biden with. And is there an area where if Joe Biden was an absolute mercenary, he could take advantage of this situation and crowbar China into, lower labor costs and blah, blah, blah. If he really wanted to put the arm on them, could he do it? Yes. But it would, because they don't have the means to do it, they don't have the workforce, their demographic collapse is continuing. The only place they get the workforce to rebound back to where, even close to where they might have been, the only way they do that is through slave labor. The accumulation of more slave labor in Uyghurs and other immigrants, Vietnamese migrant workers and others who are just snatched up near the border and forced to work in a place or go to jail. There is no upside in this because, unfortunately for the average Chinese person and the world, Xi Jinping and his ilk don't want a way out of this, because the only way out of this involves them not being in power anymore. Same situation you're finding in Putin's Russia currently. There's a way out of this Ukraine mess for Russia. It involves them leaving. All Russia has to do is just leave. War's over tomorrow. Similar situation with Hamas. The minute they drop their guns, this is over. Those guys are going to jail. Obviously, the Putins of the world and who will be on trial at The Hague and the Wagnerites will be in big trouble. But the war itself will be over. And if you're truly for peace, I believe, if you have two warring parties of anywhere in the world, where if one side drops their weapons, they will be wiped out, and if the other side drops their weapons, the world will be over, I'm for the former, not the latter. It's a pretty obvious. It's pretty obvious who the aggressor is. It's pretty obvious how quickly it would end were they to stop with their aggression. That's clear. And if you're truly for peace, that I think that's the walking point. The same thing is true to some degree with the economic battles that are going on. If China played fair with everybody else in the world, everybody would be happy to build things there. But not in this case. They have no interest in changing this policy, and if anything, they're doubling down. We got to take a break. We'll be back right after this with your calls, 773-763-9278. I love myself some wave jazz. You can always sing Michael McDonald gibberish over it. Yeah. That's not good. See this December? See what right? To January. This is this whole thing. That's Chinese New Year boost. And then the same thing that happened last year, just faster. This is last year leading to this drop. This is happening faster. The only thing that's stable, food. Even housing is going down. Look at that shit. I'm in a break, so I can swear. That is, if that's your country, that's terrible. We're looking at a zigzag recovery that needs continued stimulus to keep growth close to 5% area that the government is aiming for, says crazy person at Danske Bank AS, referring to this year's official growth rate. I think the key areas to put effort on stimulus is the housing market and consumers. Dude, they have somewhere in the order of 150 million unused units sold with no one to go into them. What consumers are you talking about? Beijing in late October announced an unusual 1 trillion yuan additional government bond issuance earmarked for post-flood recovery and disaster prevention. That's fun. Disaster prevention. You mean economic disaster? Because that's where it went. Like, just it went in people's pockets. I'm gonna go with, since I'm talking about China, I'm gonna go with Steve first, Chicago, and then we'll go to PHK and Jim, or sorry,
Sounds
Jim
good.
and PHK in that order. It's because Jim called first. Yeah,
We're coming back right now.
excellent.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
It's always good to be on for Joan in the middle of the day because we get to have callers and take calls. It's a great time. And not the least of which is our dear friend Steve from the Gold Coast, who called in as well. He's got some things about China and domestic issues he wants to talk about. Welcome, Steve. How are you?
Fine, thank you. And I haven't forgotten about that $100 you owe me. But on a lighter note,
it was yuan, and it's lost value.
It's important. Well, okay, that's true. That's true. We can actually use that as a thought experiment in terms of making the point here with regard to China. And in 2019, it was the consensus that it wasn't if, but when China would overtake the United States as the largest economic power on the planet. Fast forward today, no one's even having that discussion.
Nope.
Because prior to COVID, the Chinese Communist Party had already expressed concerns about what it meant when you have so many people who are millionaires, multimillionaires, billionaires, hugely wealthy people in a society where inevitably they felt that these people would co-opt their power. And as a result of which they decided to institute policies that would, remove from the private sector this privatization process, sort of backpedal it a bit so that the Communist Party would retain power going forward. And of course, that's obviously problematic. Secondly, even when we look at the numbers in terms of China at its height, it was problematic because China had a strange way of sort of calculating economic growth and productivity.
That's
so
adorable.
In this country, if you build 1,000 units of housing that nobody buys, that just sits there, we don't count that as GDP. Or you buy cars that nobody buys. No, but in China, that's what they were doing. Okay, we just built 100,000 units of housing. Haven't sold any of them. No one's living in them, but we count that as economic output. Obviously problematic.
Even worse than that, they would have an element with the cars. One of the big things is I've shown on my show, my streaming shows several times, the footage of these like electric cars, the BYD cars, which is the joke is that stands for burn your driveway because the batteries blow up. But they do something that you can't do in the United States, which is buy the cars under a false pretense, register them under people who are either dead or don't exist, and then they just park them. And they go on, as far as the world market is concerned, that car is considered sold to a private citizen. And there's no citizen involved, and it sits in a field and rots. And there are miles of them.
Yes, you can fly in, and depending upon where you need to do business, you can see these things, and you wonder, okay, is this some sort of lot where dealers are storing cars? Like, no, these are cars that were technically manufactured, sold, and nobody ever owned them or drove them. I mean, this is doing this for the sake of simply bolstering numbers, and the international community was always wary of this. And then there's also obviously intellectual property theft. The production of shoddy materials up to and including things that were killing things like pets, even endangering small children in terms of baby food, other sorts of things. So, I mean, there just isn't the standard. America's not perfect. Western Europe's not perfect. But there are standards by which, if you buy some baby food off the counter at your local grocery store, you can pretty much have faith that it's not going to kill your child. But you don't know that with regard to what you're buying in terms of Chinese-made products. So, you're absolutely right. And this idea that, that China is ever going to return to where it was absent, the demise of the Communist Party is not something a lot of people are buyuying into. Again, they're cracking down. They're taking control of the industries. And, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not a defender of the free market laissez-faire system. I think you do need to have government constraints and regulations. But the idea that the Communist Party in China is going to run the Chinese economy now, and that you're going to see it return to its pre-pandemic levels of growth, no, not going to happen.
It's an absurdity.
And that's the other part of this is that the Chinese people have gotten accustomed to dealing with the West and other parts of the world, and they know how things are in other places, the government and the political and personal freedoms and freedoms of the press and so forth. And they are not terribly happy, especially young people. And of course, that takes us into the whole discussion about the demographic disaster that's heading their way. China, unlike the United States and Europe, doesn't take in very many immigrants. And the people who do, as you pointed out, don't do it by choice. They end up being imprisoned there, taken into custody. But it's not like China has some, we're allowing 40 million legal immigrants to come to the country this year. No. And China is aging because of its one-child policy. And this is going to be a tremendous problem going forward for them, as opposed to India, which is a young country, which will surpass China in terms of both population and economic productivity.
Well,
in the future,
by all measures,
based on demographics.
By all measures, India already has, and there was thanks for the transition, because the concern about China and the U.S. being at odds and whatnot was the loss of all these well-to-do Chinese students in American universities, because in a lot of ways they were propping up some of the bigger universities because they would all come over here to get educated and then go home and not be able to use their education. The irony of it. But what is happening is the offset of those students, those visas are now being eaten up by Indian students they're gobbled up as fast as they are lost by a rich Chinese oligarch who can no longer send his kids there because the government does not allow it, because they're afraid you're going to try to escape. So the number of international students, according to this article in Bloomberg, on American campuses is recovering to pre-pandemic levels, and the Chinese students are being replaced with Indian students, and no one's noticing financially for all practical purposes. There is many there to take those roles, because you're talking about a country that really has 1 billion people versus China, which is pretending to have 1 billion people, and has for a long time.
And this, of course, is going to create a lot of problems for China in terms of domestic instability and so forth, because you can get people to be pretty much stable and accept that the imperfections, as long as their standard of living it continues to go up, which is happening for the last 30 plus years in China consistently. It's been a remarkable achievement. But now, when things start to plateau or decline, all of a sudden people are going to start to notice, well, you know what, my life is not better, it's worse than it used to be, and I'm living in an oppressive regime. And the question is, who's to answer for this? And that means that the state has got to exercise more repression of its population, which, of course, takes us back to Tiananmen Square and other sorts of things. And then I was wondering if you could also address this whole question that was raised recently about, I don't want to get too far into the woods on Donald Trump, but apparently, in addition to being an election denier or whatnot, Trump actually bought into the notion that he could somehow return to the White House in between elections. The election fraud story aside, he actually thought that there was some mechanism by which he could supplant Joe Biden. This was on George Stephanopoulos' show.
Yeah, so Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood floated this idea from the very beginning, and they were all pushing. Even Mike Pillow was pushing this idea that they could, if they'll just flip the election and there'll be a lawsuit, and then they'll just declare the election over, and then Donald Trump will be president automatically again, which is just cartoonishly dumb beyond all measure. But the idea that whether or not he bought it or not is suspect to me, because there's a lot of value in him pretending he bought it versus him actually believing it. And the reason for that is that if he knows he lost fair and square, and if he knows there is no way to get back into the White House but through another election, then his lies that led to January 6th were just that. His attempt to overturn the election results in Georgia were just that. Now, he thinks that will get him around it, and just going, I was doing my best. I was doing what I thought was for the integrity of our elections as president of the United States. He's going to tell that story. And there's enough people in a jury, possibly, there's one that will hang that up and let him get through, is the theory in his mind. So whether he believes it or not.
All it takes is one.
Yeah, one
right,
Trumpy.
And that's absolutely true. It's an essential point. In all these cases, it takes just one nutty MAGA to get onto that jury, lie their way on, or however else you want to put, who just simply, it's called jury nullification. He can just decide, no, I don't care about the evidence. I'm going to vote no. He's not guilty.
Well, there's the other aspect of it. There's one other thing with it, which is there could be one legitimate juror who is not a MAGA fan, who literally watches him in court, listens to what he says, listens to the evidence, goes, this guy is so stupid, he actually believed this. And that, in and of itself, might be the reason they hang up. Like, he thought he'd actually won. He wasn't trying to steal anything. He thought it was his. It was a mistake over, who had rented the rental car. It was that kind of thing. And it's a wash for them. They don't think he should go to jail for it. So the punishment is too high for them to go past the point that he's just dumb. We can't penalize people for being dumb. Yeah, and that's what he's hoping for, too.
Yeah. And as an extension of that, I mean, lately, his public addresses and some of the interviews he's given, you talk about, going after him and going after Joe Biden and so forth. I mean, this is a guy who's convinced that Barack Obama is president.
Right.
Or that Barack Obama was president. And not just one slip or two. So if you're going to question, the cognitive capacities of someone like Joe Biden, then you can't ignore it when it comes to your buddy Trump, if
right.
you want to play fair, So they're not willing to accept that. They'll always talk about Biden, but no, Trump's fine. He's not insane. He's not suffered for any number of emotional and psychological problems.
Right.
And and he's the most honest guy in the world. But Joe Biden's corrupt, and as long as there's an investigation, which is why you have this sort of investigation to begin the process of having an actual investigation is to
Right.
be able to say to voters, well, there are all these cases against Donald Trump, and of course Joe Biden's in the same boat. No,
Yeah.
he's not.
No, he's
But
not.
This is the way of evening
That's what
up.
the Comer
Yeah.
Jim Jordan thing is all about. Like, make sure it's dirty across the board, so you're having an argument about different elements of the story, which they can fearmonger about the border and other issues as their way of worrying people or crime or what have you. That's what they're going to drive to. The irony that Donald Trump wanted to run to the left of Joe Biden on the crime bill is and to the left of Hillary Clinton on guns at one point is hilarious. It's what's sad about it is the number of people that actually bought into that storyline. I'm up against the break, but I like the aspect of
Hal.
Trump's. Yeah, appreciate it, Steve. Thanks for the call, and we'll talk to you again sometime, I hope. There is a point about Trump sort of whether he believes his BS or not, both around his inflated values of his properties, and that's how he thinks the real estate market works versus how it really does. You cannot claim that you are a real estate super genius or politics super genius or you know more about ISIS than the generals do and all that kind of stuff, and then claim that you relied on other experts later as your get out of jail free card. And that is one of the recurring themes that Trump keeps throwing. The other thing I would say to him is that if you're going to dunk on Joe Biden for, quote unquote, not being able to put two sentences together, don't follow it up with gibberish. Just my 2 cents. If you're going to, I would prattle off something, go for the muscle memory stuff you have memorized from, well, maybe not, because that didn't work. That got you kicked out of office. Oh, well, we'll figure it out. I'm not here to help him. I'm here to help you and talk to you and fill in for Joan Esposito. I'll be back right after this break with more of your calls, 773-763-9278. Hang in there, PHK, caller, Jim, and Pat. We'll be back. Give it over, oh, baby, oh, holding on. Trump 2020.
Short break. We're back in 30.
Thank you. This is Hi, chat room. Yes, WCPT is a Chicago radio station where my radio show on the weekends broadcast from.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
All right, let's get into these callers. I'm going to try and get everybody in, and if some of you have to hold through the next break, I apologize because they're starting to stack up, and that's a good thing. It's good to talk to you. I'm Hal Sparks. I'm filling in for Joan Esposito. First up, we got Jim from Chicago. Wants to talk about Speaker Johnson. Hey, Jim.
Hi, Hal. Mikey Johnson wants to eliminate the IRS and entitlements and give everybody a copy of the Dawn of the 17th century King James version of the Bible. Now, that's his plan, but he has no coherent plan the way I can understand it.
Shouldn't he just open a motel?
About it.
If you want to give everybody a Bible, open a motel and don't charge rent. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be a King James. It's got to be the King James version. That's
sure.
the problem.
Yeah, the these and the thys. Without the these and the thys and the those, it just doesn't have the dignity. Or whatever.
You got to have those.
What do you want, Greek or Aramaic? That's crazy.
Yeah, but anyway, that's their plan. But but I don't see anything coherent. I haven't heard anything coherent about the plan. The government's supposed to shut down Friday,
right?
And I know that the president isn't happy with this character.
Nope. Hence the Moody's downgrade from stable where we were to insecure, or whatever the word they used is. It isn't because we can't pay our bills. It's because we won't pay our bills because of these folks who don't want us to pay our bills. That's it. They think they can choke off the programs they don't like and effectively have a fiscal version of a line item veto on any program that they don't like. Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid. Bring them to the chopping block by breaking the country. That's the only way they see of doing it. What they're going to do, though, is end up creating a change to the rules where if you can't pass, an automatic CR goes through. If you can't do anything, if you can't bring a new bill to the floor, it triggers an automatic CR until you present something that you have the votes for. That seems to be the logical thing.
Right, but they're in their consciousness. They have to be thinking, how do we beat Joe Biden? How do we beat Joe Biden?
This ain't it.
And but you're right. I agree. But still, they'll give it the old college try because
Sure.
They have they got an insane candidate. They got
to curry favor with Donald Trump. He thinks that the Republicans lost leverage around the infrastructure bill because they didn't crash the economy with the debt ceiling, and he thought they could use that but that's because unlike the rest of these Republicans, and some of them obviously are businessmen who think this way as well, but he thinks you could just walk away from the table at some point. Well, the problem with the idea of running the country like a business is you can't fire the poor. As much as Republicans would like to, you can't just eject the citizens that aren't productive and keep the ones that are. That's what they seem to be wanting to do. And in a grotesque way, I would guess that's where their aversion to any kind of universal health care of any sort, a public option or anything like it, comes from. It's like, you gotta separate the wheat from the chaff some way. And one of the best ways to kill poor people, I suppose, is just to let them die of their own devices. It's awful, but I don't know what their other answer is.
Well, if we're all armed with a Bible, at least we got a chance at the next world. Anyway,
that's true. Absolutely. Appreciate it.
You have a good show.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Buddy. Take care.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And we got time, so let's jump in and grab PHK from the north side. PHK, you there?
Hey, Hal.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, Hal, how is local sportsing team?
They're playing good at sports ball. They're making points and also getting down the field. And moving ball and working together as a team and just getting out there and doing what they're supposed to do.
Great.
And their offensive defensive line is doing greater than it was before.
All right, listen, I got a few questions for you. First off, I want to. There's people trying to. They're not really defending Trump. But there's people trying to say that Trump keeps mentioning Obama because he's playing up to QAnon's whole deal. That Obama is behind the scenes.
Yeah, Kill Me
I'm gonna
brought
shoot
that up
down because.
It's silly. No, he is literally brain farting his way through it.
Exactly. He would distinctly and clearly say that he would mention Biden and Trump is not playing 3D chess here. He's just lost. He's confused and he's still suffering from ODS, Obama derangement syndrome.
Right. Well, he's still, abundantly aware from the popularity of Obama that what he hears very often in circles is beyond the fact that he was beaten by a guy he says has no cognitive ability, can't finish a sentence or put two sentences together, campaigned from his basement, only had, reporters show up in little circles when he had a rally, blah, blah, blah. That guy beat him by a lot. And also, he's also aware that Hillary Clinton beat him in the popular vote, and that everybody that he hears, and this is the part that digs at him the most, that if Obama could have run again, he'd have wiped the floor with him, period. And he knows this, everybody knows this. So he's still fighting battles from before. Although a lot of this, I think, is, as he gets more stressed, I think it's muscle memory. And this is not me giving him the benefit of the doubt. But go ahead.
I do think possibly it's not like some master scheme, but he does know, rather than to concentrate on how badly Biden kicked his butt, like you're saying, if he just keeps throwing the name Obama out there, it's red meat for his base. I
think part of this came up, honest to God, because at one point he was complaining about this. They spied on my campaign, blah blah blah. He brought up that stuff again for a little while, and I watch all of his rallies and I show them on my show and we break them down on the regular. But at one point he plays the hits. Yeah, and he went back to this Barack Hussein Obama nonsense. Remember that? He kept saying that during the rally. He thought it helped him in 2016. He thought, I'll bring that back. He literally lately said they're not, Mexico isn't sending their best. They're sending rapists and murderers. He literally replayed almost line for line what he said when he came down the escalator. He's going on these it's glory days. He's replaying these things. But recently, and I'm not giving him, this wasn't not giving him a break on this, but I think because he said Barack Hussein Obama and his crowd applauds that because they hate the Hussein part and all that stuff, and they still dig about that he's got Obama stuck in his head as that's an applause line. So I'm flagging right now. The speech isn't going well. People are leaving. It's boring. I'll say Obama, and his brain works it into the wrong slot. In the same way that Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping, he mixed them up.
Some hatred.
Right.
Yeah. Let's stoke some hatred for the brown guy that has a Muslim name.
That's way more popular than Trump will ever be and still liked and all this stuff, and it just drives him crazy. The other aspect, too, is that recently he did something, and you know how much this drives me nuts, but he recently has gone back to taking credit for the VA Choice Act of 2014, which was signed into office by Obama. He said it at his most recent rally because it was close to Veterans Day. That's what he brought that out.
His supporters will believe it, is the sad part. Okay, I want to get in a quick, two-part question, if I could.
Sure.
Regarding the Middle East, because I do. Now, first off, I'm going to say I am no expert on the Middle East. So what I'm trying to do is remain objective here and not fall into the binary disorder so many people seem to fall into these days. So there's a guy on CPT on Sunday morning. Seems like a decent guy, although a lot of his talking points I don't agree with. Okay. His contention is that if Biden wanted to, he could end this war almost immediately within the next few days. I believe his talking point is by ending funding for Israel. Now, that sounds like far less garbage to me.
It's gibberish.
Because
it's not. By the way, it's not just far left garbage. It's far right garbage as well. There's a ton of horseshoe theory and overlap going on in the anti-Israel, anti-Jewish sentiment on both sides of the polar. Yeah.
I can't believe this guy's on CPT. He's on Sunday mornings, and he does. I don't know if his theory is his strategy is to just kick around these right and far left talking points to get the switchboards lit up or what.
Maybe.
I've called him before and disagreed. So now on the Biden thing, because I know we're on limited time, if I could just push this in my opinion, Biden inherited this mess, and this mess has been going on for a long, long time. Sure. Unfortunately, it came to a head under Biden's term, right? But we're obligated, and I'm not taking sides. I don't like Netanyahu either. Right. I see the faults in both sides here. I'm trying to stay in the middle where the truth usually lies. Mm-hmm. And Biden inherited this mess. Unfortunately, we're obligated to Israel, whether or not a guy like Netanyahu
here's what I'll say.
Charge of it or not.
I hear you. Well, let me interject this. We are obligated as the United States to a two-state solution. The vast majority of the diplomatic efforts by the United States of America and the feeling of the general feeling of the vast majority of Americans is there should be a two-state solution. There should be a stable government in both places. Neither one of them should be abstractly attacking each other. And then eventually there should be what are effectively porous borders between these territories, just like they are with any other country. That's where the U.S. falls. The U.S. is not, objectively, singularly behind Israel in this regard. The only reason it seems like that is because Israel is not just at war with Hamas right now. They are in a hostile territory surrounded by 4 or 5 countries that border or close to border them that want their eradication. That's why the U.S.'s attention to Israel seems to be we have their back all the time on a military level, because it's all those fronts. When it comes to the West Bank and Gaza, the United States, since Jimmy Carter, has been operating on the premise that there will eventually be a two-state solution, and we just need decent bargaining people on both sides to finally make that happen. And we have tried everything we can along the way to do that.
That leads to kind of how I wanted to cap that up. What I'm thinking here is Biden is a sharp guy, especially on foreign affairs. If you don't believe me, or if someone out there doesn't believe me, look at the debate he had with Paul Ryan back when Obama was running for a second. So he wiped the floor with him. Biden is a wonk when it comes to this stuff. My feeling is he's waiting this out, and he knows when the dust settles, Yahoo is out of there.
Yep.
And we can really negotiate and start getting some good things done. So
agreed.
He's stuck between a rock and a hard place here right now.
Because of, by the way,
the other thing I have.
Well, we're at the end. We're at that break, so I'm lose you. But real quick. It's okay. Go ahead. 30 seconds. Go for it.
What about Hamas? I've been looking into this. Their charter states that there will be no Jew that can hide behind when the holy war comes. No Jew can hide behind a tree or a rock. That God will point them out and they can kill all the Jews. Is this really true? Are they that diabolical? Are they that insidious?
Hamas, Islamic Jihad, are different from the Palestinian Authority or Fatah. They are the military arm, and that is absolutely their goal. The question is, how much do they align with the Palestinian people if the Palestinians were given an option? And I don't necessarily think they do. We'll be back right after this. I'll address some of that on the other side of the break. Appreciate the call. We'll be back, and we'll take the other calls too, Pat. And I think we got a couple more calls in there. We'll be back. Yeah, hi chat room, by the way. It's always great to have these conversations, on the quick. Yeah. Let's see. Boston from Western. Oh, hey. Western Massachusetts. What's happening? By the way, hi, chat room. Yeah, I'm filling in for Joan's show, on Joan's show today for her show. So we begin the second of 3 hours. All right. So. This is, Yay. Oh, there we go. I'm gonna and by the way, we weren't able to live stream or film the Hearts Alive event last night because there was literally nowhere for me to set up my system, my laptop and 2 cameras to be able to actually film it in that space without obstructing the actual production. So next time, I'll arrange for it next time when we have more control over the inputs and the outputs of it. But it was really lovely. Hearts Alive Village, for those of you who don't know, is an animal rescue and veterinary and forensic support for animals, like looking up into animal abuse and all kinds of stuff. An organization here in Vegas. It started in 2013 by this woman and her daughter who are just lovely, and they just had this huge dream of this thing, and they brought all of it to fruition in a decade. This place has a medical clinic and an adoption thing. They have alignments with Petco here in Las Vegas to help adopt out pets. They do, the trap, neuter, and release for cats in the area, and I guess less and less dogs, but most of the time the dogs are taken in. And now they have a horse rescue as well. And you guys know how important horse rescues are to me or whatever. But I'm going to go out to their new horse farm where they've taken in 8 horse farms, I believe. Thanks to see that. So is Pat still with us, Chicago, and John's now on? Is that where we are?
Yes, correct. And I'll be putting another name up there.
Okay, cool. So it was just lovely. Good people, really sweet. My buddy Richard Hunter sang. It was a good time. He did stand up. The daughter Kendall, who helped start the organization, she sang. And then our friend Elaine, who is the knight for the Silver Knights, she came and sang the song about dogs. I think it's from Broadway. I don't know the musical, but it was really lovely. And it was just a room full of, pet lovers. It was really sweet. And they raised some money, and they had a dude doing a matching fund so that everything they raised, they made more money for. So it was really nice. It was great. They asked Summer and I to help kind of put it together, and Summer really was the backbone of it. She helped organize the whole thing, and I just was like running tech and hosting, and then getting a couple other performers on board, and it was great. But this was their first fundraiser ever, and they've been in business. They've been around for 10 years. It was full. It was packed, and it was just great. There's like no way this venue will be able to hold everybody next year. Yeah, Summer does indeed rock. She truly does. Okay. And let's see. Okay, we'll be all right. And chat room, hi. There you go. And look at you blazing it. By the way, don't forget to
Back
like.
in 30.
Thank you. Like and subscribe to this stream as well. I'm gonna set up a separate stream, so I'll go offline at the end of this stream and pop back on another channel, so it doesn't end up being a giant 5-hour block. But yeah. Okay, we're almost back.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
Quite frankly, I get most of my news from you.
Joan Esposito.
Y'all ready for this?
On WCPT 820.
Welcome back to the show. So we still got callers on the line, 773-763-9278. I'm Hal Sparks. I'm filling in for Joan today as she's away, but she'll be back very soon. And let's go to, I think it's Pat is next up in the chat. Yeah, or in there. Pat, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hi, go ahead.
Yeah. I wish to have a comment about Chicago as a sanctuary city. And I think that Mayor Brandon Johnson may need to bite the bullet and tell people Chicago has accepted 20,000 migrants, and the city can no longer afford more people. Chicago it's a city, so it has limited land. It's not a state or a country.
Right.
And the mayor may consider saying for such a date of time, the city will have to return migrants to Texas or back to the Catholic Charities.
Gotcha. Well, I will make a distinction real quick. I will make a distinction between what is effectively a sanctuary city versus how many people are dumped here by Texas in another way. Because sanctuary city is really about, people being able to live under what is effectively a papers, please experience in their life. And so that you don't have ICE or Customs and Border Patrol or people like that wandering around to anybody who looks foreign to them asking for ID just because, or going after nonviolent criminals in those areas specifically. Now, there's variance about what that means legally in each place. And Chicago is not taking on these people that are coming up here from Texas or being bussed up or what have you, as part of the sanctuary city aspect. Secondarily, from a generalized job point of view, they're not taking any jobs away currently. The volume of people is really about housing, temporary housing, until they move into something else. The problem is on a federal level. Biden just allowed a bunch of Venezuelans to get work visas, for example, so that while they're waiting for their asylum cases to be adjudicated, they can work and make money and pay rent and do all those kind of things. And when they're able to do that, they can move into an apartment that they rent themselves or live with relatives and pay part of that or whatever. Until that point, they are either effectively homeless or need to be sheltered. And they need to have some sort of sheltering. And that's where Chicago kind of runs aground, in that effectively these groups of people without the ability to work or make a living are waiting for what's effectively a 2, 3, maybe 4-year trial date, and they're living effectively in a limbo in that regard. That doesn't work no matter who's running it. Does that make sense? At least? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I have a suggestion for a place where they could send the current migrants. Oak Forest Hospital, I don't know, you're not familiar with Chicago, but it's an enormous property that's only like a fourth being used. Mayor Johnson, we have to talk to Tony Preckwinkle about it, though, because it's under Cook County. But they've got gobs of land over there, buildings that are already there. And I thought, since they put out $500 million thus far, it wouldn't be, at least the buildings there.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The amount of unused industrial and governmental buildings that sit idle for a myriad of reasons is in and of itself a solution waiting to happen. You're absolutely right. And whether that's where they go or the myriad of vacant buildings downtown that are held by foreign investors that don't want anybody in them so that they can just use them as a holding place for money until they sell them as the price goes up, because American real estate always climbs comparatively to the rest of the world. Even in our crash, it's worth more than other countries. So they just buy these buildings and sit on them. And that's become an increasing problem both with the corporate vacancy rate as people are working from home or businesses are struggling to get their people to come back to the office. They are moving out of these places or moving to more rural or broken up minor offices, that kind of stuff, or moving out to the suburbs, for example. There's a lot of useful space to do this in. But the zoning aspect of it, which is largely the city council, and the aldermans, I guess, in league with the mayor, would have to create a plan that allows for, some version of nearly eminent domain, and that will hit a wall almost everywhere. The question is
right,
temporary versus permanent. We have to solve that aspect.
Yeah, we have a lot of vacant school buildings that could be repurposed as well. And,
I agree.
On the subject of the election, abortion and birth control is a straight up win if the Democrats pay attention. They talk about not having any money. Wait till you have the 10 babies you hadn't planned on having, because the Republicans are in charge.
Right. Yeah. And they've doubled down on it. They're the lesson they learned from last Tuesday is be loud and proud about your failure. And the only thing that they did wrong was not to be more sexist or more controlling. And it's a losing issue. It truly is. Tuesday proved it. The polls, in effect, didn't mean anything in this term. They were totally in contrast to the actual voters, which I think should be indicative. We should be aware of that. And in a lot of areas, the Republicans themselves are not going to make this easier on themselves.
Right. And then, too, I think they could win, the Democrats, if they're very careful and look for the theft. Look for people being, some thousands of people being knocked off the rolls, and the election judges that are no longer there.
I got to say, that's been a thing they've been pushing for a while, and that has zero impact. The reality is, if they knock people off the rolls, statistically, they're not knocking real people off the rolls. They're clearing them of dead people and other stuff, and they're doing what they try to do is eliminate real voters by being slapdash with it, doing name sound-alikes instead of checking the records. As long as they're doing it by the rules, it really doesn't matter. And if they break the rules, that person has a litigation point where they can say, I was denied my right to vote, intentionally, or, with a willful indifference to my rights as a voter. And you get a class action lawsuit against the RNC in any particular state, that'll put the hurt on their fundraising for quite some time. So ultimately, they're not going to have that huge impact. What we have to worry about is turnout and seriousness amongst our voters, that we don't let the inserious ridiculousness or the fear-mongering or the dissipation concept drag us in the direction of not voting next time around. Because you get, for whatever these people's gripe are that don't feel like they can vote for Biden or whoever the Democrat is in their area, is going to get that, whatever they dislike about that, tenfold if Trump and his ilk get in there. And luckily, they seem to be aware of that, especially on women's rights.
Right. And lastly is the computer flip. Watch them, flipping computer votes.
Yeah, that's nearly impossible to do. It used to be easier, or it was conceptually a problem back in 2000, 2006 to 2008, that was a real concern because there was no paper trail. Now we have a near ubiquitous paper trail. Most people, when they fill out their ballot, it prints out a receipt thing, you put it in an envelope, and that goes into an actual tally machine. That's how most of the machines work. It's how they work in Illinois. That's one of the reasons why the Republicans and Trump and his ilk attacked Dominion genuinely, is because Dominion's machines are built to guarantee you a receipt. And if you can get them out of there, the next follow-up machines are the ones that don't. And that's what they're shooting for. This idea that they want paper ballots is a smokescreen. It's nonsense. And the only reason they want
what about the mail-in ballots and how they're getting rid of the mailboxes, etc.?
Yeah, the drop boxes issue was only meaningful largely during COVID because nobody trusted the mail because of if you got close to the election within 4 days, you're like, I don't want to put this in the mail because it might not reach there by election day, and because of Louis DeJoy, the guy that Trump put in charge of the post office, who was like dismantling machines and all this stuff. People got genuinely worried that if they mailed their vote in, it wouldn't get there. So drop boxes became crucial because you knew it would get there. You knew it would be. Now, in all honesty, most people in those areas, there are going to be drop boxes at all the election places. So even if they're not ubiquitous on every corner, you'll still be able to go to one. And in most of the situation, most Democrats are voting early, even in states that are trying to cut the souls to the polls stuff, and they'll try to dog ear all the funding for that kind of stuff, and it won't work because Democrats are fired up about voting. On the other side, you have all the problems they create: lack of drop boxes, lack of mail-in voting, all that kind of stuff, difficulty registering, kicking people off because their name sounds like something else. That's affecting white redneck voters in the outskirts of, in Georgia and all these outlying areas who weren't even big on voting in the first place, came out for Donald Trump and aren't sure they're going to come out again because they don't trust the voting machines. He's literally talked these people into, if you can't vote on voting day, your vote's not going to count anyway. So what's the point? So they've fallen into this smoke them if you got them attitude about voting, where they're just like, trust the plan. Q will save us, blah, blah, blah. And it's the reality is, look at the turnout. Look at the red wave that never came, that kept New Jersey and Virginia in terms of the state legislature and the House control in Democratic hands. And look at last Tuesday versus the polling. Look at where it's headed next year. Women are 51.7% of the voter electorate. The other half is made up of half men who care about them and don't want terrible things to happen, and half who don't care. And the half that don't care, quite frankly, are demoralized and angry. And unless there's something on the ballot that allows them to eliminate the right to choose for a woman, they're not going to show up. Why bother?
Okay. Now, what about you said they're angry. Do you see them having another, January 6th?
Jan 6th? No. And I'll tell you why. Because there's no impetus for it other than to, a moment of tyranny. I worry more about lone wolf idiots than I worry about a coordinated attack. Because Donald Trump, as private citizen, is never going to be able to, put a rally on the, on the mall again and then lead a large group of people to storm the Capitol. It's not going to happen. Nobody's going to fall for it twice. You fool me once, you get fooled again. So there's no point where anybody, Nancy Pelosi didn't want 10,000 soldiers on the steps of the Capitol because of what he would have made it look like. And they would have been people that he handpicked as the National Guard that would have been there. So he'd have picked them from states that very well may have had this idea that this will be the day we turn the country around. All we got to do is follow the leader. And since we're the National Guard now, we've been nationalized, he can tell us whatever to do. And if that means take the Capitol, take the Capitol. So I don't know why you would surround yourself with Texas National Guard troops or Montana or Wyoming, spot groups that he would pick out. It's an absurdity. Won't happen again. And so they missed their window. And luckily for us, and we got to take a break, and I appreciate your call, but we got to, luckily for us, this coup that Donald Trump attempted was top to bottom run by complete morons. If any of them had two brain cells to rub together, we would be in deep trouble. But in reality, they were just too dumb to pull it off. and they're not going to get another bite at that apple. We'll be back after this with more of your calls. 773-763-9278. John and Adam are waiting in the wings to talk. We'll be back right after this. I'm Hal Sparks, filling in for Joan Esposito. I tell you that, like, you wonder why. I wonder why Republicans. Well, I'm going to say this for the air. I will get in streamer mode and start talking the entire time, but I want to save this actually for it. Anyways, hi chat room. Love you guys. Conspiracy. It was a conspiracy of dunces. Absolutely. Bill Maher, I have no clue what happened to him. Too much weed. I think he's trying to be an elder statesman of liberalism while smoking too much weed. I agree. The chat window is hard for you to read. Oh, because it's small, or because it's. We'll see if. Beg your pardon. It's easier to just be in the actual chat. So, apologies.
Back in 30.
Thank you. It's this one. Let's see if I can shrink this down a little bit. That a little better? Maybe? It's difficult. You guys are so nervely. Back to it. Thank
you. Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Sometimes, people wonder, like, what is it about Russia that the Republicans just love so much? Never mind the Russia, and Donald Trump going, I've never been a Russian asset. I don't know that he's even been an asset to his own family. So that's a debatable point anyways. Whether he was a useful idiot for some of them is another question, and I think a reasonable one to ask. But on top of that, there's this kind of running question about, like, what is it about Russia that they seem to clamor to, besides it being a white religious ethno-state largely? Can't imagine. On top of that, there was a story that just came out, and we'll get to our callers again in a second, 773-763-9278. A deputy of the upper house of the Russian parliament believes that female education hinders the prosperity of Russia. It's like the Make America Great Again means go back to the 50s, and Russia's already at it. The Russian parliament called for limiting higher education for young people, and especially girls. This proposal was made by Margarita Pavlova, a member of the Federation Council, the upper house of the Russian parliament, from the Chelyabinsk region. In her opinion, the Russian authorities should seriously concern themselves with the spiritual and moral education of girls in order to pull Russia out of the demographic hole, which in and of itself is an ironic and relatively disgusting phrase, but what have you. Pavlova is sure that they need to be focused on having children, not on getting an education. I don't know. Does anybody know how to say chicks, am I right, in Russian? Because I don't know why she didn't just jump to it. Yeah. We need to stop multiplying the number of young people who receive higher education. I don't think you should use multiplication even in the description of it. I think you're baiting them into getting one. What is this word multiply that I hear? Maybe I'll learn more about this. Damn it. Which then, in fact, leads them nowhere. Yeah, we need to stop multiplying the number of young people who receive higher education, which then, in fact, leads them nowhere. No, just because they're sent to die as cannon fodder by Vladimir Putin in a field for a cause that nobody understands does not mean that their education wasn't worth a damn. They certainly never got to use it. She goes, they either start working in completely different professions, yeah, like the military, or something else. She's great. She's very educated about this. And this search for oneself drags on for many years. As a result, this reproductive function is missed, said a member of the Russian parliament. Now, there's an immense prophylactic, if I may, in hopelessness. That when you look to the future and what is laid out before you is horrifying and without growth or possibility, that'll dry you right up. I gotta say, that'll put you in a situation where you're just like, I don't know if I want to subject a child to this, right? there's a lot more of that going on. Also, the drinking. I would also just furthermore, and for those of you that don't know what I'm talking about, I have a little story. This is from Moscow. This little story right here, if I may. There was, here's the story. There was a sudden commotion in a prayer room in Zernitsk near Moscow. Today, a man walked in with a grenade. 45-year-old Alexei walked in at a moment when believers were performing prayer. The man had a grenade in his hands and began threatening to blow up everyone. People rushed to another corner in panic, but the grenade turned out to be a dummy. Later, when Alexei was already detained by the police, he admitted that he had taken the grenade from a nearby barber shop. Alexei could not explain why he did this. Perhaps the reason was that he'd been drinking for 24 hours. I gotta say, maybe get that under control and you won't have to keep your people dumb to make more of them. Okay, let's jump back into our caller. 773-763-9278. Let's go to John in Madison, Wisconsin.
Hi, Hal.
Hi.
Calling I've spoken with Joan before, and she has the best listeners, that's for sure. Very educated.
They're lovely. Yes. Agreed.
I did, and she thinks very highly of you, by the way.
Aww.
I did want to mention the latest polls, at least according to the CNNs of the world, show Biden in big trouble. Well, that's just not the case. Biden can show you, President Biden, that is, can show you equal number amounts of polls showing him in the lead.
Right.
So I would take all the current polls with a grain of salt. Plus, like you mentioned earlier, the results of the elections, for example, in Ohio last week.
Yep.
I mean, that's more real-time information, in my opinion.
Yes. The Tuesday election was the real poll, because that's the active voter getting up off their duff, not doing something through the phone or through conjecture or attitude or some kid answering the phone for their parents and just trolling or any of that stuff. That's the actual voting public putting effort forward, showing up. And when they did, it shocked, well, it didn't shock me, but it shocked everyone who were expecting, this, a similar voting turnout to what the polls were showing. And this is going to continue through next year, as long as, as Democrats recognize the seriousness of the issues in front of them.
I agree. And wasn't Barack Obama behind in the polls one year out as well?
Yep.
So there's your proof. The other thing is CNN and those types of news outlets, they need a close horse race to boost ratings, and it's to their advantage financially to make everything a sports analogy. Thanks, Hal.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I appreciate the call. I agree. I really bristle at the idea of the sort of conspiratorial aspect of it that people often discuss about these things, like kind of the smoke-filled rooms aspect that CNN, when I think in reality, they just look for a way to ping pong the news back and forth to keep it interesting, because that's where the clicks come. And so if they can go, well, the one side says this and it's crazy, and the other side says this and it's crazy, or this incident happened and wow, and this incident happened as well. As long as it can keep you kind of in this tennis match of extremity, that's how they hold on to the viewership. And if they found out pretty early and pretty quickly that they do not have the potential for a right-wing viewership that they thought they might have had post-Trump in this window where they were trying to lean right and show everybody that their balance actually went center-right as opposed to center-left or what have you, whatever their articulation of it was. It just turned out the audience was not coming there. And the attacks, even as they were, I guess, unnecessarily friendly to Trump and his ilk, he was continuing to attack them anyways. So what's difference did it make? I think the more money-making decision that they actually made had a lot more to do with them not following through on that let's try to steal audience from Fox business that they were trying earlier, because it wasn't working. So they just backed away from it. Now they're still trying to, that kind of poll, that kind of information does not excite Republicans to watch CNN. That kind of poll makes Democrats afraid to not watch CNN, if that makes sense. So, anyways, let me grab. We're getting close to the bottom of this, and I don't want to, because I have a feeling that Adam's question is a rather large one. So, Adam, if you can hold through the break, I know you've been holding anyways, but if I get you on right now, it's obviously 2 minutes to the break, and I don't want that to eat it up. So I hope you could stick through the break on this. I'm Hal Sparks, by the way. I'm filling in for Joan Esposito today. She'll be back, I think, tomorrow? Day after tomorrow. Yeah, something like that. But either way, the woman is very good at self-care. I'm terrible. I work all the time. I'm a maniac. I'm constantly lighting the candle at both ends and trying to light the middle. If you'd like to check that out, you can watch my live stream at infotainmentwars.com every day, and Monday, Wednesday, Friday, twice a day. We'll be back right after this. It's the Joan Esposito Show. I'm just Hal Sparks, hanging out. I would never do good at retiring. Yeah, no, I would just shift to another career, I think. I would, finish my engineering degree and just be a weird, wily-haired inventor. Marty! You know what I mean? If you're going to make a time machine, why not do it with some style? So, stole the info on the third party from Canada. This looked helpful. Excellent. Okay, Donald Trump's lawyer, Alina Habba, and her husband owe over $1 million in liens and warrants. Somebody's not getting paid by Donald. No wonder she's not in court today. Oh, that's fun. Thanks, Professor Funbags. Sweet of you to say. Probably right. I'm so excited. I don't know if Steph's told the sexy liberal news yet, but there's some. I gotta wait for the all clear for them to announce it to me. But yeah, getting serious about election year. Damn it, let's do this. He can give you a good deal on some broken pinball machine parts. I can break a pinball machine, so that works. Love to see your inventions. Oh, thank you. I got a few in me.
We're back in 30.
Thanks. Don't get me started on Spark's simple settings. Coming to Shark Tank at some point, and key lights, which I spelled QI, which I invented. I once ran this by our dear friend Rob Glenn, for a mock-up. Yep. I do too, Janelle. We'll do it. So, yeah. We're on our way back. At least
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Okay, after much ado about something, I hope Adam in Hawaii is still hanging in. Hope he's there. Adam, are you with us?
Yes. Can you
Excellent.
hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead. Thanks for hanging on.
Oh, hi, Hal. It's Adam Prawl, Adam Westish on your chat.
Oh, right on. Hell yeah.
And yeah, I'm good. I love actually hearing your voice, so this is cool.
Yeah. Yours too.
Yeah. And I'm sorry I couldn't interrupt your sausage fest with a female voice because when women call you, they really, they really ask good questions, like when you had Benny Loco before. So
that's true. Pat also had some good questions today. I think she was, I definitely think she was in that cul-de-sac of anti-immigrant sentiment that they're pushing on a particular slice of the Chicago electorate right now. I've heard that from a lot of different angles, and it's not particularly pretty, but she's a decent human being, and I think trying to make the best of it. So that was okay. But anyways, go ahead, please. I don't, want you to get your piece in.
Yeah. Yeah, no, well, it kind of relates to everything you're saying, so I hope this isn't too vague or sounding or anything, but one of the things that like if you read a lot of sci-fi, like my dad subjected me to as a kid, one of the things you look forward to, like with William Gibson and Neuromancer and Count Zero and all that cyberpunk.
Yep, he was the guy who coined the phrase cyberpunk for people that don't know.
Stuff.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, he wasn't he? So, yeah, is the idea of like I don't know if he called it infopocalypse, but kind of the point where information is so ubiquitous that it becomes kind of impossible to effectively lie, so that at some point things like disinfo and all the institutions and dictators and things that generally depend on control of information just don't have any foothold anymore.
Sure.
Which
we're definitely passing through an envelope towards that right now. That is definitely the direction we're headed. Sure.
Yeah, and it seems like the Republicans are doubling down, like Putin and all the various authoritarians. Because to me, the Republicans, the more dictatorial parts of like both Hamas and Israel, or let's say, Putin's regime, North Korea's regime, China's regime, that they call the Communist Party but isn't communist at all. All of that stuff, it's all, they're all depending on the same sort of media bubble that has been working for them so far, which is to make bad faith arguments and then have the media arguing about, instead of the facts and what's really going on, they're arguing about whether the people are talking out of bad faith or just really are truly crazy, which is like a total waste of time. Like, is Sidney Powell the Kraken? Does she believe she's the Kraken?
Yeah, stupid or crazy is not a
belongs to padded cells.
Yeah, stupid or crazy is not an argument worth having about somebody whose ideas are fallacious and useless to begin with. You know what I mean? At a certain point, while the rest of us are, just like if you're in a ship that's going down, or you're in a lifeboat with limited resources and that kind of stuff, none of us, while we're trying to sort out how much provisions we have, or how many people can fit in the lifeboat, or how many people can, we can help, or whether this dude's leg's going to go gangrene or whatever, the idea about whether the earth is flat or not, that somebody at the tip of the boat is making, whether they're stupid or crazy in their argument about it, is immaterial to the reality that the rest of us are dealing with. And it's funny that Trump and his ilk seem to be doubling down on the ridiculousness side of things, that they are, I guess, finding an emotional, if not an intellectual or informational, and I hate that word, but whatever, toehold. They want an emotional toehold, right? Even if it, like Trump said recently, somebody around him was like, it's not that it's what he says is true, it's that it feels true. That's more important, which is just, from an intellectual standpoint, it's just madness. Why you believe that is not worth conversing about. And that's what you're talking about in the news. They'll talk about whether or not these people are nuts. Or what reasoning? Right.
And I got your Monty Python reference there too. It's got me leg, eh?
Yeah, right.
The people in the lifeboat arguing about who has the juiciest looking leg to start munching on.
That's right.
So and that's what that
and no one's
me
rowing.
Crazy too, because right, exactly. I feel, because I have this trans buddy here. She's like my auntie. She is my auntie, really, in reality. But she follows like the more mainstream news, and I deliberately stay out of her phone, so I'm not influencing her too much with my video choices of what to watch and stuff like that. But I noticed that the general baseline of what she ends up with tends to be right-wing talking points all the time, like, Putin is kicking Ukraine's ass, and excuse me, I don't know if I can say that.
That's one of the ones. It's in the Bible. You can get. Yeah.
Oh, okay. He's kicking Ukraine's donkey, and and all that kind of stuff. And then World War III is going to start now because of Israel, Hamas, and all of this stuff. And it's like those emotional arguments that make people feel like, there's some truthiness here that lasts, that bubble that lasts just long enough for the person to believe it and then stop researching it and then go and repeat it to their friends.
And also, there's another stage. There's another stage to that, which is they hear just enough to kind of it enters their transom. They regurgitate it. It turns out not to be true, but everybody else has moved on. They went, that didn't turn out to be true. And then they didn't even reference it, like a retraction gets very little coverage. And so they'll carry this idea that like it was never retracted, or that was just a bump in the truth ruffle that they were following, and that it's sort of still true, kinda, even if we moved on from the period of the talking point or whatever. And they carry it around as if it's a self-evident piece of history, right? And then it stacks on all the other ones, so that creates this really weird like stack of hypnosis around certain ideas, none of which are actually true. And it's what they blame on, like you could look at what they say was in the Mueller report versus what was actually in the Mueller report is sort of, our experience of just genuine reality with them. So, yeah.
Right. And that brings me to the last, I'm so glad you said that, because that brought me to the last little note I had written about this kind of question, which was that the one area where I actually kind of disagree with you in everything you say, which is that I think that Trump definitely has narcissistic personality disorder.
Right. Sure.
And then I think that, not that I'm a psychologist or anything, but I've been in enough relationships with them and have been raised by some. So I feel like I kind of know what I'm talking about in that regard, but I feel like it's really tied in with the world, because I feel like the way the world has been run up to now, and it's kind of the patriarchy, one might argue, or the white Anglo-Saxon, what was it? People used to say WAS was white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, which it's maybe not as much of a thing anymore that people say, but that the whole system itself, it depends on a certain amount of narcissism, just like human survival depends on a certain amount of narcissism to get advantage and to find mates and to find money and all that kind of stuff in human society.
I would say, I would disagree only in that the word narcissism is a pathological version of confidence or optimism or self-preservation. Right. That all those things that you're talking about, you're really just talking about confidence, optimism, and self-preservation. When they metastasize into something that doesn't actually bring about the things you're talking about, which is where that's what narcissism is. And insofar as the sort of idea of narcissism of white Anglo-Saxon Protestants starting all this stuff, George Washington was the first guy in history to go, when I'm done running this country, I'm going to stop. That didn't happen before him with any regularity, with any meaningfulness. Kings rotted in towers with bulbous sores all over their faces in an attempt to keep their idiot son from running it until he cut their head off or stabbed them or took over, or the queen poisoned him and took over the place. Like this was how most things were run until this system that is not, has withstood the types of attacks that Nixon and Trump and I would argue Reagan with Iran-Contra have put on it throughout the years. It's actually held up pretty well. And I wouldn't write it off as simply matriarchy in that regard, because the value of the women who've been, who engaged in this, from the suffrage movement to the, the integral elements that they played in the creation of programs and their steering of their husband before they had the right to vote, and then their families after, directed the way this country has gone. So writing it off as something sort of antithetical, that like we're a kingdom. I have to say that, and I think that's just the distinction linguistically that we're talking about, because that's where what you brought up initially was the idea that you and I differ on whether or not Trump has narcissistic personality disorder. I think the argument only comes down to, in that regard, if I may, is narcissistic personality disorder the kind about a person who psychotically believes in their own self-worth and greatness and superiority, or is it a farcical mask they wear to hide their massive, brutal insecurity, and they take it out on others? I would argue that if that's the definition, that's what Trump has. But most people would argue, I think, that the category of it is this belief that you love your own reflection so much you fall into the pond. I think Trump is revulsed by his own reflection. That's what my understanding of, my layman's understanding of what narcissistic personality disorder is it's not really like
oh wow, look at me, I'm beautiful. Because whenever I look in the mirror, I go, ugh, I'm about to turn 50, and I feel like it right now. But and versus somebody going, hey, hey guys, hey ladies,
Right.
that whole thing is covering massive insecurity, and a lot of the things
Sure.
that Trump
Maybe that's
and
what makes
other
it the disorder.
dictators do, because
Maybe.
is that they cover for that,
Right.
and the word salad thing where he just repeats the hits, and then he doesn't really have he doesn't have people who agree with him. He has believers and followers in the cult, and that's what they do. They have their massive, cult of flying monkeys to gang up on people. And I know, because as a gay guy living in rural neighborhoods, I've been ganged up on a lot. So I know when these people get together, they have a lot of influence and power, and they can get you arrested, they can get you in trouble, they can get you hurt. And that's what MAGA is. It's a cult of bullies that's there to...
I agree that about that
society.
Group of people. I would argue that the MAGA people have what I would call actual narcissistic personality disorder. They actually do believe in their superiority in a psychotic level, like the ginormous bloviating land masses that pass them off as the master race at these Klan rallies, where everybody's just an obese hillbilly. And none of them can read and that kind of stuff. Like, you have to be a nutcase to think you're the master race in that regard, but they genuinely do. And that's part education, that's part child abuse and just a life of ignorance and awful. But I think you're right about the traditional definition of narcissism as an ideology is more prevalent in MAGA itself than it is in Donald Trump, the man. And I think a lot of them see him as a vehicle because he puts on that mask well enough to convince them, or they believe to convince somebody else. It is one of the ideas of the Christian followers of him believe that as long as he's lying on their behalf, they don't mind he's a liar, no matter how big a sin lying is, right? So as long as he's lying to get Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court to get rid of Roe v. Wade, he can grab all the women he wants to. He can hang out with Jeffrey Epstein. He can do whatever he wants, and he can cheat and lie and steal and all this stuff. Just as long as he does that one thing, he's on a mission from God, right? That's all that matters. And that's their narcissism. That's their belief that it doesn't matter how we get there. Our way is so right, we can be wrong in doing it. And that's what they share with, I think, Vladimir Putin, what they share with Hamas, what they see in these dictators, that they recognize, like, might makes right. And if we just had, even George Bush played around with it. It was like, I think it'd be a lot easier if I was a dictator. Remember that? And that's what they liked in him as well. So I think, look at us, and I think it's a wonderful thing, but we've come to kind of an agreement about these dual definitions of narcissistic personality disorder versus pathological narcissism, which I think is the distinction, right? And and the reality is that Donald Trump can't stand his own reflection, never could, hates women, because the only women that would ever sleep with him in his mind are women who want his money, and therefore that makes them prostitutes, and so therefore all women are prostitutes, like, in his head, and that's how they should be treated. It's clear that's his mentality about it. I mean, he buried his second wife on his golf course, for crying out loud, with no headstone. That is that is not a man who's proud of the relationships he's had, right? I appreciate the call. We went over the break here a little bit, so I got to take a break. But great to talk to you, and a great conversation. Thanks so much. And thanks for being in the chat. Love it. We'll be back right after this. I'm Hal Sparks, filling in for Joan Esposito. Great job, Adam Westish, by the way, in the chat room. Yeah, we get to so at the quarter hour, I have a little bit of wiggle room, but if I get too drifty, it gets long. And I want to get to this woman, Mary, in Mount Prospect, right after the break. We come back. So, what did what's the lesson? Why try to label another person's sexuality? Was this? What's the argument here? I missed the top. Women are people, right? I agree. That's true. there's so much friggin' hay made about the what is a woman thing, and people can run around whether trans women are women or whether you call them trans women or whether they want to be. There are trans women that I know that want to only be referred to as trans women because they're a distinct thing in the world. They're not just falling back into, their existence doesn't blend into some version of the norm. They want to be able to operate as such, but they don't mind being defined as such. And what most of the argument falls into,
we're back in 20.
Thank you. Woman is descriptive or definitive. And because it can be used as both, then you have a bad faith argument with both sides flip-flopping them. You have people who believe that woman means biological female, but all the time using it as a character.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Excellent. We're taking your calls. I'm Hal Sparks filling in for Joan. 773-763-9278. Next up is Mary in Mount Prospect. Mary, hello. Are you there? Is she there? Do we have her?
Yes. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
Hi.
Hi,
thanks. I'm so glad I had a chance to talk to you. I'm glad you're filling in for Joan, although I love Joan.
Me too.
But I love when you fill in. And I also listen to you on Saturdays.
Excellent. Thank you. Go ahead, because I want to make sure we get to your stuff, because it's, the hour wanes by. So feel free. Go ahead.
Absolutely. I will cut to the chase. I will be as quick as I can. I think I heard you when you filled in for Joan like a while ago. You were talking about your view on universal health insurance for everybody. And you thought, I hope I'm getting this right, that you said it's like people think it's a right, but you had an idea that it should be a privilege for some and a right for others, like a right for people who maybe were born with a certain condition. I just wanted to see.
No, clarify. What I actually said is
what you meant.
Yeah, no, specifically what I said was, I don't believe healthcare is a right. I believe it's a responsibility. And what I put to that is, to those who can maintain their health and are healthy and have the means and wherewithal to remain healthy, you have a responsibility in a world where there are limited medical available drugs and supplies and doctors and nurses and all this stuff. Yeah. You have a responsibility to keep yourself as healthy as you possibly can, so that you are not taking up unnecessarily the medical system for people that can't help it, by hook or by crook, by accident, by disease, by being downwind from some contaminants in the water that give them a cancer that they can't shake. That you have a responsibility to not muck up the system. This is the same argument I would say under why get vaccinated during COVID, because if you can get vaccinated, you can stay out of the hospital, so that if anybody who can't get vaccinated or has an aversion to it or any other issues with it that does get sick of anything else, has that hospital bed available to them when you don't need to take it up because all you needed to do was get vaccinated so you don't end up with worse COVID. You could ride it out a little better. Does that make sense? So you have that responsibility. The other thing is that as a generalized society, as Americans, we have, I believe, a responsibility to help and support people who are in that situation, where they are in a system and a situation that they cannot control, impoverished, damaged by environmental issues, birth defects, and any aspect of those things that are out of their control, okay? Or even, to some degree, people who smoked before they knew smoking was bad for you, even if the tobacco companies hid it, but they didn't know, and then they ended up with lung cancer. None of us are like, well, sorry, that is your ass. Like, nobody feels that way. That's not how we should live. And we as Americans, in a wealthy country like ours, should have a system in place to deal with those folks. Now, we do have Medicare and Medicaid for the sort of the bottom rung of it, right? To make sure that nobody needs to fall through that crack, right? That can be the baseline. But I also think there's a secondary tier, which I would call the private option, the public option, which is a buy-in that you do with that's sort of means tested financially, either through a tax break or through the money that you pay in, which is effectively what Obamacare gave us as a buy-in for some of these things. But I do believe a public option available through multiple states is a more effective system than an overall federal system, because of the size of the country and the diversity of the population and the chance that a right-winger will get in there and strangle the system. That's always my concern with a federal system, is that look at how they talk about Medicare and Medicaid, and imagine that tied to everyone's health care. The NHS in England is going through a period where people are talking about phasing it out, and that's a much smaller country. If they did it on that scale in the United States and sent us back to the status quo by basically throwing the rental car in reverse while going 100 miles an hour, the damage would be devastating. So my feeling is it's just a different way of wording it, but we effectively get to the same place as opposed to a right. The problem I have with the word right is that God-given on your own in the middle of a field with your family or whatever, no one is responsible for coming out to the middle of nowhere and healing you of your sickness with their effort and endangering themselves getting your infectious disease in that process. You don't have a right to that in the world, like as a natural right. That's usually how we talk about rights, is a natural right. Because you, in healthcare, rely on the work another person does. A doctor, a nurse, a pharmaceutical engineer, a chemist, a pharmacist, and any number of people. Does that make sense? A physical therapist. These are people who can't be forced to work for free, and therefore a structure has to be set up to make them be able to feed themselves and their families, expand their lives, have children, have a car, all these other things. You can't just go, well, you chose to do something good with your life, so you work for free now. That's antithetical. And that's what making it a right versus a responsibility does. You are effectively categorizing healthcare workers as chattel workers, as factory. So it would baseline their pay, even in nursing and all this stuff, at very low, unfortunately. That's how it works out in bigger countries. Most of the pilot programs that are in smaller countries, financially, they either have to drive taxes up immensely, and those folks still don't make a lot. So you end up having, like England has a ton of migrant doctors that come to work there, where the pay is up for them, but down for what would be local doctors in that regard. If you work for the NHS, right? A lot of Indian doctors work there for that very reason. It's great for them. It's a lift. But for the locals, it's a step down financially. So in the United States, what I proposed was a state-to-state, across state lines, public option from each state that wants to put one in place. Washington State, Massachusetts have their own versions of them. California could have one as well. And financially, the idea being, instead of buying into a single federal system, you would buy into, say, Washington State's or Massachusetts. You could buy into it just like you could buy into Blue Cross or Blue Shield or any of these others. But the difference is that instead of a profit matrix that pays for investors and what have you, it would go to the state's coffers, their tax coffers, to better their streets, their schools, that kind of stuff. The lotto effect, if you will. That's where the money goes. Then other states, knowing that was a profit-making potential for them, that the profits stay in the state and in the function of the state, and that you could buy across state lines, having multiple options for that would be the impetus for more states to do it. And then you would have a decision between buying multiple nonprofit state-run systems across state lines. If California, you didn't like how they were spending their tax dollars, you could move over to Massachusetts. But if there's one in the federal government and the Republicans get a chance to choke it off, they will. So it opens up the buying across state lines. It creates more bargaining power, even if you're buying from private insurance, and then you have multiple public options. That in a country like America, that's the most sound way forward that allows for this. It shuts down the states' rights people, and it creates a functioning system that is harder for them to singularly destroy. Does that make sense? Does that explain?
Yeah. No.
In
Yeah.
general?
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate hearing your view on it. I guess and I know you have to get to the breakers, the callers, but I was coming at it from a point of view of where I guess I heard you incorrectly, and I'm glad you clarified what you meant, because I'm coming at it from a point of view where I've all my life had anxiety, depression. I developed anorexia, and I had all these health problems from that. And I was thinking those weren't choices. Like, I also had alcohol addiction, and I thought, it sounded to me like you were saying, like, if you made those choices, that you shouldn't have a right to health care. If like it was something like that you could have controlled, like I could have stopped certain things. You know what I mean? Like it's not a birth defect or a congenital
That's
issue.
It's the same thing with like any form of addiction or whatever. I think there's, you would have a system in place where you would have multiple insurance options, for example, instead of singular paying, yourself for going to rehab or something like that. You have better options available to you because they have to live up to the standards of multiple outlets instead of just the one federal system, which may or may not work. And, at one time, if everybody settles on one idea. And the good example I would give is EVs, hybrids versus hydrogen coming up. So Japan is all in on hydrogen. They're moving in that direction because ultimately it's far more carbon neutral than lithium and all these other things. The United States is going EV battery, but we're also moving away from lithium batteries towards solid state or something like that. But we're all in on the battery recharging setup. So we, as a country, we kind of have to choose. We chose it with gasoline. We didn't run our cars on kerosene. We didn't, nobody decided to do a steam combustion engine on vehicles. Once we settled in, the government subsidized that form for a very long time. In the same way that we're doing it with the electrical grid in terms of these things. Now, will there be swap outs available and will it be much more modular? Absolutely. It's way easier to get rid of a charging station than a gas station because of what's left in there. But I will say that once a federal government has to make a decision about one of those things, let's say it makes a decision on addiction recovery programs, and that system 10 years later turns out to have, 50-50 with just cold turkey, that somebody just does it on their own. We've invested a lot in it, and it didn't move the ball. It didn't help anybody. So multiple options are always, being there so that if at first you don't succeed, try again. I believe that addiction is a disease, and I don't necessarily think everybody comes to it because of their own behavior. As a matter of fact, it's often a cascading thing based on innocent choices. So absolutely not. So I hope that clarified, and I appreciate the call. Yeah.
Thanks,
absolutely. Absolutely.
I appreciate you talking. Thanks so much.
Absolutely, Mary. I appreciate the opportunity to clarify. We'll be back right after this with William from Toronto. Look at that. We got Canadians calling in. Nutty. Excellent. Hal knows the DNC relies on what? On insurance and pharma industry for enormous money campaigning. It's too politically risky for what? You think I talk about that because of fundraising? Darkstar, you actually believe that? You actually think that I think they need the fundraising, therefore pharma, therefore, and that's why I think a multi-state single-payer system is better functioning? Really? Really? Good Lord. You do realize, not only do I not think like that, most people don't think like that. And think about, I would argue, think about the rolling ramifications of that thought. Think about what you'd have to believe about me to think that that's actually, what's too politically risky? What is too politically risky? What is politically risky about what? You mean Medicare for all? Is that what you mean? What do you think happens with Medicare for all? Do you think pharmaceutical companies no longer make drugs? You think if you look at the DOD budget and how they negotiate for weapons and all that kind of stuff, do you think there'll be similar or better efficiency in the negotiation around pharmaceuticals? I mean, there are as many pharmaceutical executives who wish there was a country as rich and as big as the United States that had a single payer system, specifically a Medicare for all system. That because they would, I mean, it's a single, they could basically name their own price or not give it. Yeah, in Canada, they still have insurance companies, right? Yeah, I'm not, all the fascists scream socialism. Well, some of them scream for it as well. Expand the VA and Medicare. I agree, but a good portion of the country doesn't, and they have more senators. let people buy into Medicare. Well, that's what a federal single payer system would be. William from Toronto is Doc Spanoff. Oh, nice. Excellent. Okay, well, we'll be back in like a couple minutes. So, yeah, let's start funding the VA adequately. Exactly. Industrial socialism is okay, though. See bailout. The industrial socialism. Socialism is a permanent state, not a bailout in particular. And the U.S. government and the taxpayer made money on all the bailouts from 2008. We earned interest on the loans in those bailouts, or they paid a early repayment amount of money that was less than the overall interest if it took them a while to pay it off. It's not socialism. They backfilled it to make sure it didn't collapse, but it's not socialism. We need a transition to Star Trek politics ASAP. Well, keep in mind the Adam Westish. We're not too far off. We're getting closer, but they have replicators.
Back in 30.
Thank you. The world and want and need go very different directions when you have replicators. Does that make sense? FDR injected socialism but didn't go all the way. He also was against black soldiers and white soldiers serving next to each other. So there's that. Yeah, 3D printers and food printers. Yeah, but
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive.
Quite frankly, I get most of my news from you.
Joan Esposito.
Y'all ready for this?
On WCPT 820.
I gotta say, I'm enjoying the conversations we're having in the chat room of my live stream as well at infotainmentwars.com. We don't need the documents. We have everything memorized. And where I am Alex Jones. And those of you that aren't familiar, I'm Hal Sparks. I'm filling in for Joan Esposito today. I am often referred to as the establishment, the Democratic machine. That's me. I'm the deep state. You know, I may not hit bottom, but I'll scrape the heck out of the sides. And I do my best to try and get everybody through these things with my own brand of stoic optimism. But let's join in, I think, a regular member of the chat, if I may. William from Toronto. William, are you there?
Hey, Hal. Yeah, it's Doc here. It's Doc,
Doc
here, and I just wanted to give my big shout out to all the crew on Twitch, Twitch over YouTube every day of the year, and fight me.
Boom! Shots fired.
I wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask you a question about outrageous, because I've heard people like Jamie Raskin and other people use the term outrageous. And is your prohibition on that term specifically to things that are said about yourself? If something is said about me and I say that's outrageous, it's absolutely true, versus
about someone else. Yes, very important distinction. Thank you for bringing that up. It is the one asterisk / sub section D paragraph 5 aspect of it. For people that don't follow on the regular who are listening to Jones Show and are like, what are they talking about? Whenever you hear a politician's been charged with something or accused of something, and they say this is outrageous, these charges are outrageous, what they're saying about me is outrageous, that's an admission of guilt. Anybody who says outrageous about themselves is because you cannot be outraged on your own behalf. And this is the important distinction. If you say like this is outrageous when somebody does something crazy over there that has nothing to do with you, or makes an accusation about somebody else, or says something nutty, that can be outrageous. But when you point it on yourself and you go, it's outrageous, you would even ask me such a question, that's an admission, because you can just say, no, that's not true. And they don't. They go, that's outrageous. And that statement is both true in that, sure, it's outrageous. It's outrageous when anybody says something like they would grab women by the groin with their permission. Forgive my radio-friendly language. That's outrageous. That's an outrageous thing entirely. Doesn't mean it's not true, though. Right? Trump could have said, this is outrageous. People even bring this up. Well, sure. It's outrageous you said it, so if they repeat it, it's outrageous. Fine, whatever. People can be outraged. But they're not outraged because it's not true. They're outraged or that it's a lie or the accusations are making somebody clutch their pearls. It's outrageous because you did it, son. And so, yes, that is the very important distinction. Yes, when Jamie Raskin is talking about the outrageous things that Jamie Comer says or the outrageous things that Donald Trump is saying about what he would do when he goes back in office, that makes sense. Right? But whenever you use it for yourself, that's an admission of guilt. And scene.
And I figured as much, but I wanted to clarify that because I think a lot of people might have been thinking something along the same lines. And it's really interesting to hear you're talking about the healthcare system. Obviously, after this call, I'm going to go to see my doctor and get my feelings checked for free because I live in Canada and it's all free, which is ridiculous. And it's a facile way of viewing things. Are there things that are great? Yeah, absolutely. No question about it.
Well, here's one thing. In Canada, it's not free. You pay for it with your taxes. You also there are limitations on non-elective surgeries and that kind of stuff. But if you can pace it out, that's totally cool. You also have private insurance to kind of push yourself to the front of the line. You can always come down to America, which is what a lot of rich Canadians do. But also, your country has about a third less people than California, and hence why it's a much
38 million.
Yeah, it's Hence, it is much more manageable for a system, which is why I put forward the idea that large populous states that, especially find more of their citizens in need of this kind of a baseline safety net should be able to create one, and other states, if you live in Wyoming or Kansas or Arkansas or whatever, and they don't have one in place, you should be able to buy into California so you're not dumping money into an insurance company's pocket for no particular reason or no particular benefit, and you don't know where your profits are going inside or outside the country. But in the case of if it was California, Washington State, Massachusetts, Oregon, any of these that want to set it up, at least that your money is going into schools and roads and their social net, that they have there. So like that, and again, not a one single change of administration in the federal government where they lock up all three houses, the two houses in the Senate or in the presidency, could knock it out, could destroy it. And that's always been my concern, because what Republicans do is they run on this idea that, government can't do anything right, elect me and I'll prove it. And they go in there, they hamstring really important agencies like the Department of Education or the DOJ or any of these other things. And then they complain that they don't work right. And when people, are angry that they're not getting the services they're taxed for, they go, well, it's obviously shouldn't even be paying these taxes in the first place, but they shouldn't be going to these things. And they just try to strangle these systems that, but for their existence, millions upon millions upon millions of Americans would be uneducated, in danger of losing their lives and their safety and their any meaningful path economically upward out of poverty, certainly, and certainly from the middle class up beyond that as well. So that's why I have that distinction. That's the only reason, because I don't want the one day where everybody gets mad or we have another 9/11 or something and Republicans end up taking control of it, or some equivalent party, whatever that is, the future Whigs, in 25 years, and people's memories are short and they just let it happen. And then they go, you know what? Social Security's gone. And so is that healthcare program. Or we just choke it to death and it doesn't work for anybody anymore. And so people have to go to private insurance to make up the backdrop. And then they go, why am I even paying for this? 2 cycles of that and the system's gone. That's my concern. Right?
And you bring up that the change in government issue that sort of terrifies me as the next door neighbor. Mm-hmm. The U.S. was the only country ever to invoke Article 5, and you guys have a potential leader who wants to leave NATO. NATO is a bad thing.
Right.
Come on. How can it's the question of trust, international trust at that big poker table that is international diplomacy. Mm-hmm. How do you just basically whipping your cards and just like wearing them on your forehead if that's the way that you think it's going to work, and it's not going to, and that's the worry.
Well, I would argue, by the way, he's not going to get reelected, period, end of story. I'm just telling you right now, which is the good thing. And partly because of that. That is one of the lingering things, even amongst his own party. It isn't even about Democrats that hate the idea, because there's some, sort of idiotic folks on my side of the aisle who are like, I don't know why we're the policemen of the universe, that kind of business. Why do we have all these bases all over the place? They're like, because they're naval bases and we police shipping lanes so that all these other countries won't be impoverished because of pirates. That's pretty much why. That's almost entirely why. But those folks sort of back that idea as well. It's still not going to change a thing. We're still going to be in NATO for the foreseeable future. If anything, it's more entrenched, and there's I think a deepening of the respect for NATO in the United States in general, which again you saw more on Tuesday than you see in any polls anywhere. Is that there's a that thing I told you about Ben Shapiro earlier, this idea of like, he's under the impression that that it's a race, first party to sanity wins. And the Democrats have a huge head start. And Trump is running in the wrong direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just a final shout out to CSL and Andrea and the whole crew. You guys keeping Hal alive, and that's brilliant. Thanks, brother.
Moving. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Big. Thank you so much. Appreciate the call, and thanks for the ability to clarify, because these days when you're talking for a living and you start to develop a shorthand, sometimes you go, people listen, they were here yesterday, maybe they weren't, and so you do a shorthand version of something and they only caught that version. That happens a lot, and I would use that as a reminder right before we take a break and take more calls. 773-763-9278. And I've still got stories I need to get to, including America's newest nuclear reactor that's about to come online, and Amazon now has doctors, and something about food prices and right-wingers, and the story they tell themselves. We'll deal with that in just 1 second as well. But 773-763-9278 is our number. We'll be back. Hold on 1 second. Where's the yeah, here it is. Okay, good. There we go. La. I have a bone to pick with the inflation crowd, as you might imagine. Oh, there we go. Nick in Bluefield, New York City migrant crisis. Cool.
We're back in 20.
Thank you. And then I got to get close enough where I got to start getting my clips together for the next show too. Oh dear God. Oh, the Home Depot guy. Yikes. Art Laffer.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Welcome back. So, 773-763-9278 is our number, and we have more callers on the line. But before we get to that, I want to bring up something that's kind of a constant refrain that we hear on the right, especially. It's about food prices, and the idea that there's just the food is up so much that it's just there's so much, the food is so expensive. Hold on, I'm going to try to find this. Here it is. That I told the story earlier about this fella that that reposted a story he saw of this guy in Costco buying a 64-ounce jar of mayonnaise, lamenting that it was back to the price that it was before it went on sale, and therefore its price had doubled because they cut the price in half if you brought 2 coupons for your 64-ounce mayonnaise jar. Now, one of the other signs that you can look at is, you can go back and forth about, Donald Trump thinks that bacon is $50 a slice now, and that one of the reasons why food prices have gone up is the expectation of quality by Americans, and we're still ordering out at almost COVID levels at the same time that we're back to cooking at home. And there's one of the signs of this is twofold, if I may. Let me slide this over here so we can, yeah, there we go. Where you go? So there's a food index, like the price of the inflation index that they put forward. This is a U.S. inflation calculator that they run all the time. And one of the ways they lay this out is food, the cost of making your own food at home, cereals and bakery products, meat, eggs, dairy and related products, fruit and vegetables, non-alcoholic beverages, other food at home, and then food away from home. And they categorize these out. Now, food overall is up 3.7% year over year, September to September, 22 to 23, 3.7%. Now, the average, they in general, the inflation rate they like to see is around 2% in general. That's what you hear all the time. Okay. Food at home, food that people make at home and pay for is, in general, when lumped all together, is the inflation rate was 2.4% year over year. So the practical food costs, grocery-wise and cooking at home, is all in, with some things going up and other things going down, 2.4%. And there's a vacillation in these costs. But the fascinating part in it is what is actually expensive. Cereals and bakery products have gone up 4.8%, and, quote, other food at home, which are prepackaged, meals that are like ready to go meals, other stuff like that have multiple ingredients, that often where 1 or 2 ingredients, some of them chemical, are harder to come by in the supply chain than they used to be. So preservatives, a lot of preservatives will drive up the cost of a food stuff that you get at the grocery. And that's where you see that amount. But the cost of actually cooking food at home, where eggs and all that stuff, like meat that you cook at home, ground beef, what have you, anything you cook at home, vegetables themselves, in general, about 2.4%. That's pretty round. That's around the ACEs zone, 0.4 higher, but that's a vacillate number anyways. Cereals and bakery products are up 4.8%, and the other food at home is at 4.2%. And non-alcoholic beverages and beverage materials, which is fascinating, that's stuff you pour into water to turn it into something. Kool-Aid mix being the obvious one that most people think about, but the price of that hasn't gone up. But the myriad of other things that you can think of, all the protein powders and energy drinks and pre-workout stuff, and the cost of those things, and the myriad of, again, chemicals that go into those things that are harder to come by than just like stuff that's off a farm and what have you. Meanwhile, meat, poultry, and eggs, 0.2% year over year increase in price. Meat, poultry, fish, and eggs, beg your pardon, I left that out. Dairy and related products are down 0.2%. Cooking your own food at home is amazingly cheap right now compared to where it was, and in line with the Goldilocks area of actual inflation. Meanwhile, so what is making that 2.4%, overall 3.7? Why is that 3.7 where it is, almost double that 2.4, almost double it at 4. Why? Because of food away from home. That's up 6% year over year, September to September. Food away from home, if you're not familiar, is eating out at restaurants and I guess Mexican corn on the cob and hot dogs and big pretzels at sporting events, which are ridiculously expensive and always have been. And if they have an opportunity to make them more expensive because they say so, what choice do you have? You're in a stadium. 6% year over year. Food out of home. So when you eat out, restaurant foods up 6%. Now, why is that? Part of it, ladies and gentlemen, if I may, is, and get ready to hate yourself, labor costs. That's right. We're starting to pay people what they deserve. Waiters and sous chefs and assistant cooks and managers and all those folks are starting to get a little bit closer to a living wage, and that is translating into that price. It's not all of it. It's about 1%. And the rest of it, you could probably chalk out to, yes, it's pizza away from home. Listen to me. It's food away from home, but it's food brought to your home. It's DoorDash, it's Postmates, it's Uber Eats. And that that's factored into that food away from home cost. That's what raises it to 6%. But right now, cooking at home is as close to the Goldilocks zone in inflation as you could possibly get. And again, the big staples that everyone is decrying, meat, poultry, fish, and eggs, year over year up 0.2%, September to September, 22 to 23. Dairy and related products, milk, butter, cheese, all that kind of stuff, down 0.2%. So, just wanted to float that in there in general. And one of the other reasons why the cost of the price of overall inflation is where it is. All items, all in, is 3.7%, which is absolutely equal to what food is. Now think of all inflation quote all items. That is stuff you need, like stuff to patch your tire and the stuff you pour in your gas tank to keep your engine from knocking if you have an old Keister car like I do, or those kind of necessary extras that you buy all the time on the regular for whatever reason across the board. And then there are, let's just say, not quite necessaries, which are far more expensive than they used to be, but are nice to have, but they're there. And that imbalance in between the very low cost of sort of the cheap regulars, the consumables that you need all the time, and the, and don't get me started on Black Friday television sets and the cost of a flat screen in the 1990s and how big it was versus a flat screen now, and what you could buy the exact same size for and the quality of the image and all that kind of stuff, because all technology is deflationary. Let me repeat that. All technology is deflationary, has brought that price down so low that there are other things to compensate that are driving it up. It's still only at 3.7%. Meanwhile, where's energy? 12-month CPI, September 2023, down 0.5%. The cost of energy is down 0.5 percentage point from a year ago. Even with the Russians and the Saudis tightening their the available oil that they're putting out, they're lowering production intentionally to try and keep the price of oil up. Where is it? It's down. It's down, and it's going to continue to go down. Yeah. So core inflation overall, less food and energy, you get at 4.1%. Because when you take out food and energy, you get out the balancing aspect of cheap normalcy goods like gas versus kerosene versus other, crude oil in barrels, mixed with people buying, the vast majority of groceries that they get versus the extravagant aspects of it. Which cheeses you're buying, which fruit you're buying. Dragon fruit versus grapes. Those kind of questions make when you start averaging that, the vast majority of what people are getting is actually below that number. And even still, prices are coming down in a direction that will head towards next year's election. Now, there will be a movement by those that would rather it go the other direction, that are rooting for calamity because it's the only thing they can run on to try and drive it back up again. But I'm telling you, it's going to continue to go down, because if oil hasn't peaked over $150 a barrel because of what's happened in the last 2 years, it ain't going to do it anytime soon. Because what's required to limit that amount of oil into the system would be the shutting down of half the wells in Russia and Saudi Arabia and some of their partners, which would mean those wells would never function again in any meaningful way. So they can't even afford to do it. They have to have them on a trickle minimum all the time, lest they ruin them. And the United States has the highest oil output it's ever had, and our use of said oil, thanks to the introduction of EVs and hybrids and increasingly efficient vehicles and better driving patterns and all kinds of stuff, is coming down and will continue to come down for the foreseeable future. That's the direction it's going. It's headed that way. There's kind of really no way to put that, the oily toothpaste back in the tube. Doesn't mean they won't try, but it ain't going to happen. And and the Saudis have bigger fish to fry in general. So we got to take a break. When we come back on the other side, we'll get to our other calls, because we've got Nick and Ali Osher. Oh, nice. Are both waiting in the wings. We'll talk to them right after this break. I'm Hal Sparks. I'm filling in for Joan Esposito. Just, spitting some facts out just to annoy people at this point. I don't know what else to, Hey, coming hard and coming over here, there's something more. Do be good, Bobby who. Yeah, Biden opened limited stuff in Alaska to keep them out of ANWR. They won't. By the time they finish, searching for and going after the wells that he okayed in Alaska, they'll either be fruitful or will have spent the money for exploration that they would have used in ANWR. It's a chess move. It's very smart. See, let me show you this real quick. This is kind of fun. See this right here? This is food inflation, percentage increase and decrease. Over time. Here's 2019. This is kind of here 2019 to 2020. There's Trump. And then this is post-COVID. We went up to here. This is everybody. This is want and need mixed together. And then it's below 2020 right now. Food inflation is below 2020. And it'll continue to go down because it's referential. So pretty good. And again, it was look where it was all these years too. Obama. And then we get to here. 2016, it went down to nothing. And then it leveled out. There you go. 2014. And there you go. Russia invading Ukraine. Somebody, besides COVID, go find me and a bubble or some form of inflation in U.S. history that wasn't predated about a year and a half before by an oil spike in the modern industrial age, since say, I don't know, since 1930. How about that? Good luck. We get out of the oil business, this fucking yo-yo stops. And I don't mean out of the oil making business, I mean out of the oil using business. Although the making part would be good too. That'll be an ancillary aspect of it. Any reason to charge more? No. Oh no, here we go. Because at a certain point, there's a tap out number. This is the kind of thing I was talking to you about climate change and the smoke 'em if you got 'em aspect. There's a point where there was some football player recently when there was this recent spike about this, and he drives one of these like big dickhead trucks, and he's like, man, gas is so expensive. I'm thinking about buying a electric now. And like he says that out loud, that's the tipping point. That's when they go, oh shit, nobody wants to. Everybody's too mad. Thank you. They start looking long term at the cost and start thinking about it. So you can only charge so much for gas when people tap out. And they've been trying to find what that edge is over the last couple of years.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Welcome back. So we got people on the line. Let's go to Nick in Bloomfield. Is he still there? Is he still got him? We still got him?
Hi, Hale.
Hey, hi, Nick.
First, I want to thank you for helping me get through the pandemic. If it wasn't for you, my life would have been a lot crappier.
Oh, I try. That's what I'm there for.
I got a crazy idea for the immigration problem in New York City.
Okay.
So New York City offers Trump 100 million rubles for his skyscraper.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Right.
Trump's so stupid, he's going to take it.
Sure.
New York City turns around, gives him the $10 million, and then we turn around and make it into an immigration, like halfway house.
Right. Ironically enough, I will say that that wouldn't be anything new to it. It's just the first time it would be done above board. Donald Trump has been running basically a halfway house for Russian and Chinese gangsters for the better part of 2 decades now, little almost 3. So the only difference would be the economic level of the folks that would be staying there, I think. but again, anything to make him grind his teeth while he sleeps, I suppose. In reality, in there, the migrant crisis, insofar as New York is an absorption issue more than anything else, because you got a lot of, and ironically, in the immigrant communities in New York, you have a lot of NIMBY, almost, because it's so expensive to live there, you have a lot of NIMBY, sort of equivalent to the Cubans in Miami and others who don't want other Cubans coming in, or say Arizona. Immigrants from Mexico and South America have come into Arizona and don't want anybody else in. Those would be the Trump supporting ones that are trying to pull the ladder up behind themselves. The Paul Ryan effect, where he went to college on Social Security but doesn't want anybody else to have it because it means he'd have to compete with them. There's a similar issue inside the certain communities inside New York City, and there are people out there trying to drive that wedge and make it worse. So we'll see if it takes root. I mean, I can't exactly tell them how to think in that regard, but it's definitely a factor in the motivation of it. You there? You still got you? Yeah.
Oh, okay. No,
Nick,
I thought you were going to hang up on me.
No. I was seeing the report. Thanks.
Just hanging up at people in middle sentences.
No, I don't. Yeah, Steph does that. I'm too much of a Midwesterner to do it. I can't. I do long Midwestern goodbyes. Everybody knows it. So I'll see you later. Okay, I'll call you later. Okay, see you later. You hang up first. No, you hang up first. No, you hang up first. No, you hang up first. Okay, let's go to Alyosha in Massachusetts. Thanks so much, Nick. Alyosha.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. There you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks for your streaming, and thanks for being a force for good. I
try.
Choose less evil.
Yep.
The only other thing, I'm talking to my Cuban mother, who actually leans Republican, but then when I told her everything that Trump does, she's like, "Wow, he really is a reality TV show guy, huh? And not a president at all."
Right.
So I've actually had to leave other channels because again, the constant thing about, oh, Biden's too old, this Israeli Palestine thing, and then they pretend, or actually not pretend, they actually say, oh, this is just like the 60s. In other words, equating the civil rights movement in America with that, and I go, wow, what an oversimplification.
Right.
I certainly wouldn't want to project what goes through American history on the British history or Canadian history or,
right.
You know what I mean? It's like, wow.
Well, certainly not the Islamic-Palestinian conflict as well, because, all things aside, I will say I have bemused a bit about the so-called like Queers for Palestine folks that show up at a lot of the Palestinian rallies. And I'm like, pound for pound, whatever you think of the Palestinians' right to territory, and I believe that they have it, there is no situation where there's gay rights, gay marriage, trans rights in those territories ever. Just ever. If anything, it gets increasingly worse the more control they have over it. If you don't believe me, look at who Iran has hung in the last 5 years.
That's another That's another thing that my Cuban mother says about communism. She goes, how come all these people on Twitch are always interviewing like people, the professors in the colleges or the military or something like that? If they say that communism is so perfect, how come they don't take a general poll or walk around or anything like that? It's always people.
Oh, they'll have on our dear friend Richard Wolff, who luckily I think Tom Hartman has kind of dried up using, which I'm glad about. But I mean, not only, again, you can argue, I suppose, in a commune-like system, and I think that's where a lot of people who argue for communism come from, is this idea that why do we need money to exchange for things and all this stuff. And I would basically go that we're basically as reward for effort is how the market system came about. And our idea of calling this even capitalism is a little bit silly, especially now that with apps and AI and all kinds of stuff, you can mine between your ears and come up with something that might push humanity forward. You don't have to dig up a new, discover a new element or dig up a new kind of rock you can burn. But, not only has Richard Wolff been wrong about everything financially over the last couple of years, calling the death of the dollar, calling the death of the U.S. economy, saying the rise of China, all this, like everything that's turned out to be just completely ridiculous. That's been his, it clear to him. That's how it's going to work out. And yet still in the idea of I am sympathetic to people who wish there was a better system in that, but I also don't see a situation where people wouldn't take advantage of their fellow man. One of the things about a market-based approach is that you kind of got to argue one-to-one with somebody about their worth in a way that you don't have to in a kind of, cut and dry system that's often put forward in these things. I'm always reminded, I was in London doing shows, and I used to hang out in Camden Town because I love it, hence my son's name. And there was this little coffee shop I used to go to all the time. It was just great. And I would sit there, and this one guy came up to me. He was handing out flyers, and the flyer said, "Music should be free." And I was like, I thought it was for his band. And I was like, what is this? And he goes, music should be free. And I was like, what do you mean music should be free? And he goes, it shouldn't cost anything. Music is, for the betterment of all people. So, and I'm like, do you make music? Are you a musician? And he's like, no. And I'm like, why do you want musicians to work for free then? What are you talking about? You just don't want to pay for what you like from someone else. This isn't even a necessity. We're not even talking about food or medicine. This is something somebody optionally sits down, spends their time, risks their livelihood, their lives, and their future and their career, trying to go after a career in music, and they want you. They want to just do it for free. You just want them to work for you for free, and that in many ways informed my feeling about their view of what sort of communism is. Like that guy was clearly viewed himself as a Marxist in that regard. But it was always about anybody who does any effort in the world should do that effort for me for free. And I don't want to expend any effort. And I shouldn't have to expend any effort to get my needs met. And the fact that his needs went beyond health and enough food to sustain me calorically, and into musicians should dance for me. Get up and play for me. It just sounds so old school kingly. It sounds like something a monarch would do in the 1300s. Like, bring me the lute player, make him, and if he doesn't play for me, I'll cut his head off. Like, that's what it sounded like. And it's an absurdity. I would never want to force somebody to take effort, make effort on my behalf without some sort of recognizable compensation for their effort, especially the harder and riskier it is.
Well, no, right. So the other issue is, for instance, a lot of Twitch streamers will validate it by finding like this doomer video for 10 or 15 minutes,
right,
describing all the horror stories about insurance and this person died because the pre-op wasn't filled out correctly and all that. And then they'll go for 45 minutes on that one bad video. And then at the same point, I go, okay, that's emotional and you might have a point. The other issue is they don't talk about the good experience either.
Right.
So it's all doomer. It's all like everything is negative. And I go, wow. Okay, so this
that's
made
how,
a little bit, yeah.
Right. That's how Fox sells The Border. So why should it be any different? You know what I mean? There is a, in what I would call the progressive left, there is a let them eat cake reflex. Thank you, chat room, for bringing that phrase up. There's a let them eat cake reflex for this assumption that anybody that does the effort work in our world, that they should, for all of our talk about, I believe, people making a living wage for baseline work and then being paid a quality wage for, extraordinary work that requires danger and a chance that you may not live to see tomorrow. I mean, like the heart, working on the oil rigs and the like, all those kind of things. There's so many ancillary effects of that should go into how much someone is hired to do that kind of work, that to not give it to them and go, well, we're all the same. I don't know. I don't have a problem with recognizing that some people have to put more physical effort and use more of their physical body or their mental acuity than the rest of us do in certain circumstances to come up with the solutions and fix things and solve problems and climb up an electrical pole. And the idea that, I think a person that climbs up an electrical pole that every time they fix a downed line could be electrocuted and die should work for tips is absurd. So that's
So that's the other question. Like I get people on Twitch that go, "Oh, you support Biden? That means you betray the left or the young,
right?
Or why do you say that why we say there's no landlords in communism?" And I go, well, last time I checked, they still had military, they still had police.
Yep.
So it just amazes me how not only the doom spraying, but this thing of, think on the left, and all of a sudden everything wrong in the world will be transformed. I go, that's not how it works.
Well, here's the thing. I don't have a problem with your solution if you have a way to get there, right? They just don't. They assume that basically the way you get there is to crash what we have right now, as if no one thought, well, it's just easy. We all just sit around and it all just evens out. Somebody else will run it. It'll be fine. Those societies were wiped out by people who went, I'm hungry. Like that, in all honesty. And so the illusion that they live in it is such a, again, to borrow a word that's used a little too much, is an act of privilege. That's what privileged people think about work. And what you have right now is a weird binary of what we call the Marxist millionaires like Jimmy Dore and the like, or Russell Brand, the champagne socialists, sort of at contrast with the sort of, people clawing in the dirt to just kind of get ahead, because effort is the only thing that will make any movement forward in their life. And this somehow this idea, and I always use the apple tree analogy, and we got to take a break, and I appreciate the call, but I always use the apple tree analogy, that there's an apple tree. You recognize that you could grow a tree on the ground that you live on, and you grow an apple tree because apples can nourish people and it's a good thing to have. And so you spend time growing this thing, and then anybody who comes along can just pick as many apples as they want, and then you never have any apples and the apple tree dies. And then eventually everyone starves because nobody protects the apple tree because it's not theirs, and anybody who comes along who wants to climb it can take them. And then the other aspect is, okay, I'll do a second apple tree. And this time I'm going to say, this is my apple tree. I'm building a little fence around it. If you want the apples, you come see me because I made the thing grow and I protected it until it grew big enough to actually do it, because other people would have chopped it down for firewood. And I climb up in the tree and pull down the apples and I bring them to you, and you want them for free when I'm the one climbing up to the top of the tree and endangering my life climbing the tree to get the apples. And they're like, well, why don't I just wait around until they fall on the ground and you go to sleep and I'll just take them? Is not a morally sound way of living amongst your fellow humans. That's my issue with it. Until such time as there are waist-high apple trees everywhere you go, and you just reach down and they come off in your hand, and all of them are genetically designed to have every nutrient you could possibly want. Thanks, science. And nobody even needs to pick them. You just put your hand under them and they digitally just fall in your hand like a sleeping drone. Then we'll talk. But until that point, I think we have to have respect for the people, especially working class people and the people who do the grind of a lot of works, a lot of jobs that other people don't want to do, that, maybe they can have a say in that they're in the value of their job. Just saying. We'll be back right after this. It's Hal Sparks. I'm filling in for Joan today. We got one more break, and we got, maybe some callers, but I got so many stories. 773-763-9278. This is the complexities of Apple society. Yeah, Flake, it's, if you boil it down to it, all analogies die someplace, but that's a pretty, sound one. Yeah, Monsanto, we now own all apples, right? That's why you have a government to regulate that stuff. That's why you don't have unregulated laissez-faire capitalism, which no one is arguing for except Rand Paul. Sorry. Rand Paul and progressives. Like the libertarians and the leftists. Super weird. Excellent. Yeesh. There's so much Dinesh today, CSL. It's terrible. Just he's come out of nowhere. He's coming around the outside. All right.
We're back in 20.
Thank you.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Welcome back. I'm Hal Sparks filling in for Joan Esposito today. And there's so many news stories that we have to deal with. And I want to remind everybody that in the process of talking about especially highly complex issues, it is important when you're solving for one aspect of it to not be diverted to solving for all of it at the same time, bouncing from the holistic to the singular willy-nilly at the impulse of whoever wants to argue in bad faith against it. And you see that a lot with people who will jump into the middle of the conversation around Israel and Hamas and jump back to 1947 and 1968 and blow off October 7th as if it wasn't the impetus or to tie these things together, to get so tied up in the complexity that they don't recognize the specific, lose the forest for the trees. And then in many ways, lose the trees for the forest, basically defocusing so much on the green haze. They don't know whether they're staring at shrubs, grass, or an orchard. And that's important to how you solve a problem. And the example I would give is homelessness. The overall, it seems that in the media, anyways, in the media conversation, they are either most people who are discussing the issue are talking about the homeless as a singular tribe of human beings who all share the same traits. That the homeless even are talked about as if they're a people, like a country in and of themselves, right? And the problem with that is that there's a lot of diversity within homelessness and why you end up there. And therefore, the solutions to those levels of homelessness are very different. There's different reasons for addicts who become homeless, runaways who become homeless, people who are mentally ill who are living on the street, and I make that distinction of them not being homeless because the idea that they could maintain a home on their own or they're unhoused or something like that, instead of, quite frankly, when what they need and the only thing that will salvage them is institutionalization, is kind of written off or left at this sort of pie in the sky idea. So you have to be able to break up a complex issue into the singular. And if you're discussing one of the singular aspects of it, how, for example, in the homeless situation, to deal with people who have just fallen through the cracks, who've just missed too many payments, lost their house, are sleeping in their car, they've got a family, they've got a job, they can, or they're in danger of losing their job, or they lost their job and that was the cascading thing. They could get another job, but they're on their heels against life. The system you would set up to help that person and put it in place, and the NGOs in the U.S. and the city governments and the federal government programs you would put in place to help that person are wholly different than someone who is a runaway who's an addict, or a runaway who's there on purpose who isn't an addict for that matter, who, the varying degrees of reason in there. So it's important when you're discussing those elements, when you're solving for that, to not sort of interrupt the conversation online, especially with a "but what if." And you'll see that a lot with the Israeli-Hamas conflict or Russia and Ukraine, for example, especially when, the impetus for the circumstance we find ourselves in and around those is acute to a recent circumstance. October 7th, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2021, 2022. And so that difference, if you're solving that issue, if you're solving that problem, you're not going to solve it by discussing necessarily whether or not Stalin had the right to give away Ukraine or define it as a place, and that the Ukrainian's a language, and whether it should have been in the 1400s and the Mongolians, and if the Muscovites had only not sided with Genghis Khan. It's idiotic. It doesn't solve it. It doesn't solve for the problem that's right in front of you. So it's just a cautionary aspect of that, if I may. Now, one of the areas that we will often talk about, what I would, green energy and the like, that I would like to sort of, in the last couple minutes, put in everybody's head, is that if you are not talking about green energy and the future of energy without some version of nuclear, and I would argue thorium is probably their best bet if they can work out the kinks in that, you're not going to get there. You're going to continue to see emerging countries, not so much China because they're on a hard fade, but India itself and large swaths of Africa are going to have to burn coal to grow their societies, and they will, because the option is not being able to process energy to keep the lights on and people dying in mass, or being able to use oil to make diesel for crappy trucks that are the only option for driving, food out into the middle of nowhere in Sudan or in India or those kind of places. And if you shut that off tomorrow, if the folks that have been throwing paint on paintings get their way, then then they're like, no oil starting tomorrow. 1 billion people will die in about 8 months. You have to, the addiction to oil concept does not quite capture the depth of our use and need of oil, and it is much closer, I would argue, to a pharmaceutical like an antidepressant or an opioid, for example, where you have to taper off lest you create more problems than you solved in the first place. Oil is largely responsible for the reason there are as many people alive as there are today. And if you cut it off immediately, you're going to kill 1 billion of those people minimum. in a very short order. So the tapering off of it, hence net zero, hence the movement towards electric and renewables and all that kind of stuff that America is taking very seriously, that Canada is taking very seriously, the European nations are taking very seriously. That's us tempering ourselves away from this on a trajectory that is manageable and safe. Anything short of that will indeed result in the largest mass human death in human history. Yeah. And so therefore, if you're going to bet on how we get out of oil and gas and coal specifically, one of those is going to be nuclear. And in Georgia, they just opened the last of the big reactors. It was double what they said it would cost, and it's 7 years over budget, but it's going to last a very long time, and it's very powerful. But what's going to be coming to a city near you, more than likely, if we want to meet our green climate goals, is micronuclear. Small nuclear plants that subsidize the power grid, along with other renewables, until we can wean ourselves totally off of coal, specifically in certain areas. And if we can replace micronuclear with the coal plants we use in this country, we will beat our climate goals, and that's worth doing. Thanks to Joan Esposito and everybody in Chicago for letting me fill in today. It was a joy. Thank you guys to all our callers and the great conversations that we had. I'm going to roll over into my own show. I'm going to drop out now, and then for those that watch on the live stream, I will be popping up in about 10 minutes and restarting my stream with the regular stuff I do with all the big boy words that I use that I can't use on the radio. So thanks, Chicago. Thanks, Joan. See you guys soon. Take care of yourself and take care of somebody else. And remember, if you're ever confronted with a choice that you believe is the lesser of two evils, choose less evil. See you next time. Whew. Boom.
Thanks, Al. Have a good week.
Yeah, you too. Thanks so much. See you soon. Okay, bye. And off we go. And you guys, give me a minute. I'm going to shut down. I might start up a little bit late because I got to throw some food down my neck. And but I'll be right back after this. Enjoy wait. What happens? Let's see. I don't know if I have time for the kidney. Maybe I do. It's hard to say. I don't know. I'll be back in a few.